What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto married Koyuki? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. 25-year-old actress Yukie Fujikaze climbed the steps to her private on-set trailer and slammed the door. The message she'd just received by courier from the land of spring had ruined her good mood. Kicking off her shoes, the most famous actress in the land entered her bedroom and threw herself onto the bed with a loud snort of annoyance. A minute or so later, Yukie heard the door to her trailer open and knew that her present manager had come looking for her. "What do you want, Misato?" "Whatever it is, I'm not in the mood for it," snapped the actress as she rolled over and faced the door. "Milady, I do not know why you are so resistant. You know the council is not going to rest until you're either married or pregnant with your heir. You've already turned down several offers of marriage from young men of suitable rank, much to the council's consternation. Princess, if you keep doing this, next time you are home for your requisite 6-month period to rule your land, the council will force you into a marriage of convenience for their prestige," replied the young woman demurely. "Damn it, I know that, but those old farts need to learn that I'm not ready to settle down, get married, and have children yet. Can't they just leave me alone on that one subject?" cried the on-screen goddess. Her manager just shook her head. She knew that until they were satisfied, the council in the land of spring was going to keep pushing that agenda. The old men and women wanted to prove to the 5 nations that in the 7 years since their princess had returned and overthrown the brutal dictatorship of her uncle, the country formerly known as the Land of Snow was back on its feet and ready to be considered an equal trading partner. Yukie sighed and gazed out the tinted window of the trailer. Was she not allowed to make her own choices now? For you see, the actress known for her roles in the Princess Gale series of movies was in reality Princess Koyuki Kazuhana, present ruler of the former Land of Snow. Remembering those tumultuous times when Kakashi and his genin team defeated her uncle Doto and his snow shinobi, Yukie thought back to the words of one young ninja whose sunny personality and never give up actions turned her life around and made her accept her destiny as the Land of Snow's beloved princess. I wonder how the little Gaki is doing now. Last time I saw him was when I stopped in Konoha on a promotional trip 2 years ago. Back then I was told that he is recovering from one battle or another. At least I was able to bring a little happiness into his life during the caravan stopover," thought Yukie as she made preparations to return to the set. Yukie was walking towards the entrance to her trailer when her murky memories cleared up and she remembered what she'd been told all those years ago. Wondering why at a trying time like this she would remember those asinine words, Yukie exited her trailer and headed back to where she left the poor courier at the mercies of her longtime director and producer. Returning to her reserved canvas chair, Yukie glanced at the courier and the letter he held in nervous hands. Accepting the letter from her counsel, Yukie read it. As she did, the last parts of an idea that had been floating around in her mind coalesced into a solid plan. Nodding to herself, Yukie mentally firmed up every facet of her plan. Now if only the lone wildcard in the deck will act true to his nature, thought Yukie as she smirked to herself. Yukie's manager and the courier felt a sudden chill in the air as the actress gave the pair an innocent look. It was a look that Misato knew extremely well, a look that promised a world of worry to her and the rest of Princess Koyuki's ladies-in-waiting and promised to give the council for the Land of Spring large amounts of annoyance and confusion. Smirking in satisfaction at the boldness of her plan, Yukie knew she had a few months left before she could put her plan into action. That was good. It gave her time to perfect everything and gather some supplies and put the wheels of her plan in motion. The Council of the Land of Spring was about to learn a hard lesson. In the village of Konoha there is a large fenced-in area on the far side of the village that few of the civilian population venture near. They were intimidated by the 15-foot barbed wire-topped fence and frightened by the bestial animal sounds that floated out at different times of the day or night. There were the hisses of giant snakes, the roars of irate tigers, and the growl of other wild animals as they dealt in the millennia-old dance of life, love, and death. Tokubetsu Jonin Anko Mitarashi loved those sounds. To her, it meant that her domain, Training Ground 44A, K.A. The Forest of Death was thriving. Jumping from building to building with a carefree yet dangerous grin on her face and her ever-present stick of dango in her mouth, The recently turned 32-year-old woman salivated at the thought of the torture she was going to put a team of Anbu Black Ops through. At the request of her husband, the 33-year-old copy ninja Kakashi Hitaki, Anko had agreed to let several teams of his beloved Anbu operatives spend 3 weeks in her precious forest to improve their survival skills. Closing her eyes and enjoying the feel of the air rushing across her skin, Anko landed on the ground and stopped to catch her breath for a bit. She turned as the sound of feet landing on the walkway registered behind her. "Mitarashi-san, please be careful, you're still recovering from the birth of your twins 11 months ago. I know today is the day Lady Tsunade gave you permission to return to work, albeit with vastly limited duties, but you do not need to be in such a hurry. Please Lady Mitarashi, take it easy," begged one of the nurses Anko'd been assigned by Lady Tsunade when it became apparent that the overly exuberant special Jonin was pregnant. Anko chose not to answer her nurse and just stood there breathing in the atmosphere of her responsibility. Closing her eyes and basking in the familiar music, Anko quirked one delicately arched eyebrow as a trio of unfamiliar sounds echoed out into the air. Frowning at what is readily becoming apparent as angry words, Anko attempted to put names and faces to the slightly familiar voices. It became a moot point when several of the older, stronger, and taller trees in her playground were struck by chakra-enhanced punches and destroyed. Anko's eyes snapped open in blaze of fury. She knew of only 2 people who could do that much damage with just their physical strength. One was presently sitting in her office looking over reports from her shinobi and filling her cup with her precious hidden stash of sake. The other was supposed to be working her shift at the hospital. Narrowing her eyes to slits that scared her nurse to no end, Anko muttered under her breath, "I am so kicking her ass. Konoha's deadly cherry blossom my right fist. She and her 2 rivals are destroying my domain," hissed Anko as she sprinted toward the sounds of destruction wreaking havoc on her training ground. Deeper into Anko's responsibility there was a clearing that showed the recent signs of 3 vastly different explosions of chakra. When the mistress of the Forest of Death arrived, she spotted the trio of women responsible for the damage. Konoha's terrible Kunoichi trio. 3 of Konoha's deadliest female assassins. After Anko herself, of course. To her left at one point of an equilateral triangle, the new matriarch of the Hitaki clan saw the bright pink hair of Konoha's deadly cherry blossom, Tokubetsu Jonin Sakura Haruno. 50 feet to Haruno's left stood her best friend, toughest rival, and occasional sparring partner Tokubetsu Jonin Ino Yamanaka. With her full figure and platinum blonde hair gleaming in the mid-morning sun, Anko saw why the Yamanaka was oftentimes referred to as Konoha's shining interrogator. Stopping just inside the remaining tree line and ignoring her panting nurse, Anko shifted her gaze to the 3rd woman in the triangle. The snake mistress gulped as she recognized the bulging veins next to the eye sockets holding the light lavender eyes of Konoha's ivory widowmaker and the present head of the most powerful clan in the Hidden Leaf Village. Tokubetsu Chunin, an advanced Hyuga clan rank half a step below Jonin, Hinata Hyuga. Extending her senses out, Anko lifted her head up and looked at the tree branch above her head. Sitting up there, enjoying a large bowl of popcorn and conversing about who knows what, were 2 more familiar Kunoichi. The first, newly married Ten Hyuga, was commenting to her companion Tamari Sabaku, a Jonin ambassador from Suna, about the citrine engagement ring the 23-year-old woman now sported on the 3rd finger of her left hand. From her location just inside the tree line where the 5 young women were gathered, Anko could hear what the 3 rivals were fighting about and the unsolicited commentary from the pair of observers. "You dark-haired, white-eyed hussy, how could you? Creeping into Naruto-kun's apartment like you did last night. I saw you sneaking in," roared Sakura as she readjusted the gloves on her hands and took a fighting stance. "You're just pissed because I beat you and the blonde harlot there. I know that both of you were planning the same damn thing. Get over it, Pinky, I loved him first. Besides, he wasn't even there," retorted Hinata as she settled into her family's Jukin stance. "Harlot? I don't think I like the sound of that, Hinata, you slut. Anyway, why should I believe you when you say Naruto wasn't home? You could be lying through your oh so perfect teeth just to cover up your illicit antics with my beloved Naruto-kun. As for loving him first, you never approached him during our years in the academy and told him your feelings, yelled Ino as she settled into a modified version of Rock Lee's Goken stance and prepared for the attack she knew was coming. Oh fair cry sakes, Ino. You and the strawberry-haired bitch don't deserve Naruto-kun. He's more man than either of you Uchiha fangirls can handle. My dearest Naruto-kun needs a real woman to tame his wild spirit. Not two fangirls who tore down Lady Tsunade's office door to demand they be artificially inseminated with the sperm from that traitorous Sasuke Uchiha that Lady Shizune was able to get last time the traitor was in the village so that the damned council could have their precious Uchiha clan returned. By the way, how are your children now? I hope you suffered severely during those tedious 9 months of hell, quipped Hinata with a very un-Hyuga-like smirk gracing her ivory face. Oh, that's a good one. Hinata sure isn't holding back this time, Tamari. I wonder how they're gonna react. Chuckled Tenten Hyuga as she dug her fingers into the large bowl of buttery popcorn sweetness she was sharing with the ambassador from Suna. Isn't this a bit out of character for them? I mean, when did Ino and Sakura start plotting to get into Naruto's pants? Hinata, I understand, she's had a crush on the blonde idiot since before that first Chunin exam. Tenten shrugged her shoulders in lieu of answering her closest Kunoichi friend. She didn't want to be rude and speak with her mouth full. Her parents would have a fit if they found out that their precious daughter had forgotten her manners. Thinking back to the past 2 years, Tenten wondered the same thing. When and why did Ino and Sakura start love jonesing for the blonde #1 knuckle-headed hyperactive shinobi in the entire Hidden Leaf village? Granted, Naruto had grown from a little semi-attractive 12-year-old kid into a dashingly debonair and entirely deadly attractive 19-year-old man, but still. Why and when did 2 of 3 most attractive Kunoichi of their academy graduating class, who'd had an altogether extremely creepy lust for the brooding traitor Sasuke Uchiha during those formative years, suddenly want to drop their panties for the still hyperactive Anbu Black Ops captain who had a flair for flashy SS-class assassination techniques? Tenten finished her mouthful of popcorn and chuckled as she remembered her husband, the semi-brooding but loyal Neji Hyuga, telling her the story of Naruto using a self-developed variation of his infamous and SS-class cage-ranked secret Oiroken harem jutsus to eliminate a wanted non-shinobi playboy who'd stupidly made a pass at Uzumaki's beloved Tsunade Bachan 30 minutes before the Godem Hokage's much-anticipated and long-awaited, for some, Katetsu and Izumo in particular. They were extremely annoyed each time Tsunade sent Jiraiya on an all-expenses-paid vacation via Fist Airways. They got tired every single time the two of them had to approve much-needed funds to pay for the incurred damages to the Hokage's office. Damn Tsunade for always wanting the expensive stuff. Wedding to the one-armed toad Sanin. And still all-around #1 ranked super pervert in the entire 5 great shinobi nations as well as numerous smaller hidden shinobi villages, Master Jiraiya. Tamari no Sabaku, soon-to-be Nara, smothered her own girlish giggle, something her fiancé, Konoha's lazy genius Shikamaru Nara, wouldn't believe, as she correctly guessed what her friend was thinking about. Tamari remembered the wedding well. Her sister-in-law Matsuri, while in the mood changes of her early pregnancy, had broken a priceless and full crystal punch bowl on the head of her husband, the Godem Kage Gara no Sabaku, for some asinine comment he'd made after she'd upended another bowl, filled with a mildly intoxicating and spiked punch, over the head of Konoha's golden whirlwind for offering up an extremely explicit toast to the newlyweds during his duties as Jiraiya's best man. Tamari waited for Tenten to start the story of how her husband and Naruto, then newly promoted Anbu lieutenants, boldly walked up to the target's nonsensical palace and requested lodging for actress Yukie Fujikaze and her entourage for the night. According to Tenten and corroborated by the head of the Hyuga branch house, Naruto, using his Oiroke no Jutsu Yukie variation, had attempted to seduce the target and ended up assassinating the man with his signature elan and flair before using the Fujikaze harem no jutsu to take care of several of the decedent's bodyguards. You can say that the bum went out happy living his greatest fantasy, laughed Tenten as she returned her attention to the deadly battle raging below their seats. Tamari was about to comment on Tenten's words when she felt a semi-familiar sense of killer intent boiling nearby. Subtly going on guard as she tried to figure out who the intent belonged to, and why it was so familiar, The eldest child of the former case cage let her eyes glide over the surrounding area as she tried to find the source of the evil aura radiating nearby. Tamari was about to give her search up when she heard a sibilant hiss less than 10 feet from her and 10. Jerking her head in the direction of the noise while reaching for a kunai, Tamari stopped when she saw the poisonous snake uncurling from around the trunk of the tree. It took Tamari less than half a nanosecond to recognize the viper and realize that the two of them and the battling Kunoichis below were in some seriously deep shit. Ten-chan, sputtered Tamari while backing up. Not now, Mari-chan. This fight's getting real good. My cousin is kicking ass here, exclaimed the recently invested matriarch of the Hyuga branch family. Ten-chan, wait one kami be damned minute. Ten, pleaded Tamari as she slowly returned her drawn kunai to its pouch and made sure she kept her hands far away from her enormous battle fan sitting nearby. Ten whirled around to face her friend with a glower that would do Neji good to find out why her friend was interrupting her enjoyment of the fight. Damn it, what is it, Tamari? What the hell is it, and why the fuck are you depriving me of my joy in watching Lady Hinata whoop Sakura and Ino's ass? Snapped the irate weapons mistress. Ten, I really think we are in a major shitload of trouble here, whined Tamari as she indicated the snake poised to strike. Ten glared, turned to face whatever it was that was ruining her fun, and stopped dead as she saw the swaying king cobra. She only knew of 3 people who had that much control over snakes. Of the 3, one was dead, one was a missing nin, and one, the only Kunoichi of the trio, was due back to work running the Forest of Death that very day. The 20-year-old, newly married weapons mistress had only one thing to say. Oh fuck. Quietly sitting on the branch above her prey, Tokubetsu Jonin Anko Mitarashi Hitaki heard Tenten's sudden intake of air as she prepared to warn the trio of women destroying her beloved forest and swung down to face the 2 young women of status while making a hand sign. The only things Ten and Tamari saw before passing out were the familiar trench coat, mesh shirt, barely restraining the pair of milk-heavy S of the still nursing mother, and pissed-off evil grin of death personified before 2 more unseen vipers wrapped around their throats and covered their mouths to keep them from sounding the alarm. The last thing they heard was the elite assassin's devilish chuckle and her taunting words. I can't have you warning the 3 dumbass broads below about my arrival before I can punish them. Now can I? Muttered Anko evilly while gently and purposefully caressing the throats of her 2 victims with her kunai and leaving a thin trail of vibrant red blood on both of their faces. Anko was disappointed when her pair of victims passed out before seeing her lick their blood from her knife. Sighing to herself in frustration at her denied satisfaction, Anko turned her attention to her attendant and gave her a message to take to the Hokage. And Natsumi, make sure those battling Kunoichi don't see, sense, or hear you leave. Otherwise, I will be quite disappointed in you. I take it you know what will happen if I become disappointed, don't you? Anko stated silkily before turning her attention to the 3 vandals below and thinking of new and inventive ways to punish the interlopers for their vandalism. Yes ma'am, I promise they won't hear me ma'am, croaked Natsumi as she hurriedly gathered up the hem of her battle skirt and shunshined away with alacrity. Natsumi knew exactly how her mistress took revenge when she was disappointed. It could get bloody. Anko ignored the nurse and glanced at the 2 unconscious Kunoichi with a thoughtful look on her face. Okay now, how should I make sure you 2 don't get away before your punishment? Oh, I know, mused Anko. Oh, who knew that the matriarch of the Hyuga branch family was into bondage? Neji, what naughty things have you been practicing with your wife? This bears further investigation. I wonder if my darling Kakashi-kun would mind tying me up like that? I know I'd damn sure be game. Oh, I gotta tell Kurenai about this. Kuku. Tonight's going to be an interestingly stimulating and erotic night at the Hitaki clan compound. That reminds me. I need to stop at my favorite toy store on my way home from work this evening and pick up some more rope. I better get the natural stuff when I do. Those rope burns are gonna turn me on. Kakashi's so getting it tonight, mused Anko as an unnoticed line of drool dangled from the corner of her mouth. With her plans for the evening set, Anko turned her attention back to Hinata, Ino, and Sakura. Performing some more hand signs, she wondered how the trio of Kunoichi beneath her would react to her penitence rope and the new knots. After seeing Tenten's reaction to the rope, Anko told herself that she would pay to see how the virgin head of the Hyuga main branch family would react to her actions. I'd pay more to be the one doing the tying. Anko happily giggled before back-flipping off of her branch and sending her snakes to restrain the three 19-year-olds. Down below, Hinata was preparing to send a Jukin strike to Sakura's chest when she felt something scaly coil itself around her lower body. Glancing down, her blood froze. Bringing her face back up to see her opponents, Hinata choked when she saw Sakura and Ino giving her confusing looks of their own as similar things were happening to them. Once neither of the three could move a millimeter, a familiar trench coat-wearing figure stepped out from where she had been leaning against one of the several destroyed trees. Seeing the second most famous wicked grin in all of Konoha, nay, in all of the 5 great nations, Hinata started to panic. You three have desecrated my forest again. I know I've been gone for a while, but it hasn't been that long. I've warned the three of you time and time again about this. Now I'm going to make you pay most dearly. Let me explain how I'm going to punish you, if that old bat, Tsunade, will let me. And what exactly I'm going to do. Anko stated calmly before going into a lengthy, detailed, and gruesome explanation of what was coming to the three hard-headed Kunoichi. The screams of terror that rang out over Konoha from the Forest of Death lasted for several hours. Ah, Konoha's Forest of Death, where life is worthless, and the tortuous shouts of shinobi who ran afoul of the Mistress of Death lasted for insane amounts of time. In a land far away from Konoha, actress Yukie Fujikaze glared at the calendar depicting the last 60 days before her current tour of duty as the most famous actress in the Fire Country ended, and she returned to the Land of Spring and once again took up her birth name, title, and birthright as Princess Koyuki Kazuhana, benevolent ruler of the Land of Spring. Presently, Yukie was relaxing, or trying to at any rate, in the whirlpool bathtub of the hotel suite the producer and director of her latest movie had made reservations with for the entire cast and crew to use during the final month of shooting. Sighing to herself, Yukie gave the heavens a grin and thanked her guardian deity that she didn't have to stay in her trailer for these last few scenes. In fact, Yukie's private, on-set trailer had been cleaned out and sent back home for a 2-month-long inspection where it was completely dismantled and every system checked, repaired, upgraded, or replaced. By the time Yukie returned home, the inspection would be complete and the trailer, which had seen her through her entire acting career thanks to her previous manager, the late Sandayu Asama, would be in the process of being rebuilt to her non-negotiable specifications. When the overhaul of her trailer was complete, Koyuki and her ladies-in-waiting, with whom she often ignored suggestions from her counsel regarding her little home, would start picking the new furniture and fixtures for her little home away from home. Every piece of furniture from the dining area table to the small couch in the main room of the trailer was either ordered or hand-built in the Land of Snow. Even the trailer's bathroom equipment was replaced. The only pieces not replaced, upon pain of death, during the overhaul were Yukie's bedroom suite. She'd kept the same bed, chest of drawers, mirror, dresser, nightstand, and vanity table she'd acquired when she bought the trailer second-hand from an older actress who had retired from the spotlight. Yukie felt that the pieces of classic furniture were one of her links to Sandayu. Shifting her train of thought away from the late warrior-turned-manager-turned-warrior, Yukie pondered the conversation she'd had with her director and producer at a private dinner for the three of them. She was happy that they had decided to help her enact her plan to escape from the actions of her council, but worried that the elderly assholes would send out the shinobi from the hidden snow village, now allied to the Land of Spring and loyal to Princess Koyuki, to retrieve their wayward princess from wherever she escaped to. Yukie was even more worried about how those shinobi would treat the cast and crew when it became apparent that at least some of them had had something to do with Princess Koyuki's disappearance. Hopefully, when that time comes, I'll be busy with my Naruto-kun and he'll be busy keeping me happy. I'm going to leave enough clues that only Naruto can figure out where to find me. And when he does, I'm making damn sure he doesn't leave my bed for at least 2 days if not more. It'll be his late birthday present from me. Chortled the screen goddess as she evilly rubbed her hands together. When her mad scientist moment passed, Yukie checked her watch and decided it was time to get out of the tub and go to bed to dream happy, erotic dreams of her favorite blonde. Climbing out of the lukewarm water, Yukie reached for the full-length towel hanging from the heated towel rod and wrapped the warm and fuzzy gaily decorated terry cloth around her dripping wet and still firm naked body. Once wrapped in the material, the actress stepped the few paces over to the black marble sink, dropped her towel to the floor and inspected her body with a critical eye before retrieving her seafoam green panties from the counter and slipping her long, lightly tanned legs into the openings and sliding the delicate material up to cover her intimate folds in their satin embrace. Letting her soft fingers and their perfectly manicured nails linger over her warmth for a second, Yukie imagined how it would feel when she let the one she loved caress her velvety folds with his strong fingers and involuntarily swooned at the erotically charged picture. Shaking her head and turning to the black terrycloth robe hanging from the hook embedded in the wall for such a purpose, Yukie slipped it on and reveled in its warmth as she loosely tied the belt and made her way into the bedroom where her golden yellow sleeping yukata with its bright blue highlights lay on the queen-size bed. Discarding her robe as she crossed the deep plush carpet toward the bed, Yukie idly gazed around the room at some of her most precious belongings. There on one wall was a poster from a movie she did 2 years previous of her and her co-star locked in an increasingly passionate kiss from one of the love scenes. Even though his hair had been dyed black and his birthmarks covered up with movie makeup, he'd violently protested against the use of the powder. Much to her amusement, Yukie recognized the piercing blue eyes of her prey. In order to keep his real name secret from enemies of Konoha and of his birth family, Naruto had acquiesced to using his father's first name and a common last name to keep his real identity a secret. The night of the movie's premiere, Yukie had gotten extremely pissed off when Akamaru, Minato, had refused to escort her to the star-studded premiere gala and had thrown the grandmother of all hissy fits, much to the chagrin of her ladies-in-waiting and the elder council from the land of Sprain. The paparazzi, on the other hand, had enjoyed the tantrum immensely and had gotten tons of photos for the scandal rags. Naruto, there as a subtle bodyguard for the star, had grudgingly agreed to transform himself into his silver screen alter ego and dutifully escort Yukie to the premiere so that the opening could go smoothly. Of course, Yukie, being who she was, had most definitely abused Naruto's kindness and had, immediately after the movie, replayed the lip lock scene portrayed in the poster on the red carpet in front of the theater, much to the delight of the gathered press, the amusement of Lady Tsunade, who had come to the premiere on Jiraiya's arm, and the horror of 3 of Konoha's deadliest Kunoichi who were at the premiere providing bodyguard duty for the Hokage. Across from that poster was a picture that was a bit confusing to those seeing it for the first time. The photo was of Yukie and, wonder of wonders, Princess Koyuki Kazuhana at some big formal event the council had planned. Once again, Naruto had come through. Since the event was during the time Yukie was acting, she had to somehow appear at the same place as her birthright. Naruto has used his Oiroke no Jutsu Princess Koyuki variation to keep the council from getting in trouble if their princess didn't show. Yukie had been jealous when Naruto, or Naruko as the hyperactive Tokubetsu Jonin called his feminine alter ego, wore Yukie's royal garments and looked many times better in them than Yukie did herself. And damned if the clothes fit Naruko like a glove. Sighing to herself, Yukie used a genin-level jutsu her snow shinobi had shown her to turn off the light and turn on her radio. After an attempted coup d'état by some rebellious shinobi was put down by the appearance of the golden whirlwind of Konoha and some of his friends, including a very miffed Cage, one of the snow ninja Jonin had requested that one of the Hyugas present use their Kekai Genkai to see if Princess Koyuki had some, if any, chakra reserves. She did, but her reserves were so small that they were nearly non-existent. Climbing under the covers and reclining, Yukie rested her head on the pillow, closed her eyes, and drifted off into the domain of Mr. Sandman, dreaming of little boys and girls running around the palace with black and yellow hair as he and her beloved watched over them. While Yukie Fujikaze was dreaming of a certain bewhiskered 19-year-old blonde, said blonde's superior was sitting in her office glaring at the grinning matriarch of the reborn Hitaki clan. Tsunade, the 5th Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves, groaned as she dropped her head into her hands as the unrepentant mistress of Training Area 44 explained what she had found the 5 bound Kunoichi doing to her forest. The 5 were presently lying on the floor of Tsunade's office where Anko and 4 of her clones had haphazardly tossed them upon entering. I am very disappointed in the 5 of you. Sakura, Ino, and Hinata, with your reputations. The 3 of you should know better than to do what you did. 10-10. You're a year older than those 3 and should have stopped it before it got out of hand. You knew exactly how your three friends felt about Naruto, yet you not only didn't stop the developing brawl but brazenly sat in a tree and watched. Temari, you are not a Kunoichi of Konoha, and as such, I can't allow Lady Hitaki to discipline you like she can your four partners in crime. However, upon finding out of your gross ineptitude, I had no choice but to inform the Cage. As you can probably guess, Lord Gaara was extremely unsatisfied with your actions. Gaara was so upset that he sent his reply by the fastest messenger hawk in Suna. Do you know what his reply was? Asked Tsunade as she shifted in her seat. No, Lady Hokage, I do not know what his response was. I will accept any and all responsibility for my actions of lack of actions and will not appeal any punishment Lord Cage assigns me. Temari replied with a subtle hint of smugness in her voice. Hearing the faint smugness in the voice of Suna's ambassador as she assumed that she was in the clear, Tsunade had to smother a smirk. Gaara, who knew his older sister real well and guessed exactly what she was going to do, had let Tsunade know in his response that whatever punishment Tsunade herself deemed fit for his sister, he would certainly agree to it. In addition to the punishment Tsunade was going to sentence Temari to, Gaara was in the process of temporarily demoting Temari from the rank of Jonin to the rank of Chunin and assigning her as an instructor at the Suna Ninja Academy for the foreseeable future when she returned home. Preparing her announcement, Tsunade started to reach into the drawer where she knew she had a hidden stash of sake. She stopped when Shizune, who was standing next to the seated Tsunade, kicked the drawer in question closed and trapped Tsunade's hand in the process. Tenten, Hinata, Sakura, and Ino. Are you ready for my decision? Asked Tsunade while casting a sideways glare in Shizune's direction. Shizune merely kept the look of innocence on her face and her foot against her superior's sake drawer. Yes, Lady Hokage. As senior Kunoichi here, I shall speak for all of us except Ambassador Sabaku and say that we will accept any punishment you so decide, stated Tenten. Very well then. Tenten Hyuga, Sakura Haruno, Ino Yamanaka, and Hinata Hyuga. I hereby demote the four of you from your present Kunoichi ranks to the rank of Genin. With your temporary demotion comes the need for the four of you to have a Jonin sensei like all Genin. Therefore I am assigning the four of you as a team under Anko Mitarashi Hitaki. The four of you will follow all of her orders as if they were coming from me. You'll also accompany Anko on each and every mission she undertakes for the good of Konoha. Hinata, I know that your rank as Tokubetsu Chunin is a Hyuga only rank, but I've talked with your father and Lord Hiyashi has agreed to step in as temporary head of the Hyuga clan with vastly restricted clan head powers during your temporary demotion, stated Tsunade with a straight face. The blonde Hokage observed as the mouths of her four Kunoichi dropped in shock. In all of the history of the office of Hokage, nobody who'd made it to Tokubetsu Jonin and Chunin ranks had ever been demoted all the way back to Genin no matter how serious the offense. It was just unbelievable that Lady Tsunade would do such a thing. Tenten started to protest, but the sudden glare from the Hokage along with the little bit of killer intent the older Kunoichi leaked curtailed her protest. Nodding her agreement at the rank reduction, Tenten stepped back and waited for Tsunade to dismiss her and her friends. Putting the four Konoha Kunoichi out of her mind for the present, Tsunade turned to the lone Suna Kunoichi and passed her the message from her brother and watched as the 23-year-old blonde wind mistress paled so much as to look like a distant relation, very distant and blonde, of Hinata Hyuga. Seeing the younger woman's mouth opening but not hearing any sound at all emanating from it, Tsunade turned to the grinning visage of Anko Mitarashi, who'd correctly guessed what was about to happen. Anko Mitarashi Hitaki, I am hereby adding a Chunin to your new team. I have made my decision and have Lord Cage's support in rendering Temari no Sabaku's punishment for her actions in Training Area 44. As soon as I am finished with your Genin team, I will send a message to Lord Gaara with my decision. In the meantime, I have a low B-ranked mission for your newly formed team to perform. You and your team need to get packed and prepared. I will brief the six of you on your mission later this afternoon since this mission requires an evening departure. I believe that once Team 6-6 is prepared, you'll have a few hours to get them trained in the teamwork required for this mission. And Anko, train them well, said Tsunade with an innocent look. The five Kunoichi looked on in fear as a nasty grin spread across Anko's face. They knew that in addition to their demotion, they were in some really deep shit. I'll train them to the utmost of my ability, Lady Hokage. When it comes time for my team and I to depart, I promise they will be extremely well trained and ready. Chuckled Anko as she wrapped the rope used to bind the 5 around her arm. Anko, this time can you go easy on the welts, bruises, cuts, and blood? I need those 5 in tip-top shape for this mission? You can still use your penitent rope on these 5 as you see fit, commented Tsunade as she returned her attention to her paperwork and took a perverse pride in the scent of fear suddenly expressed by 1010 and her accomplices. Anko frowned as the Hokage's restriction on the punishment she could dish out became apparent. Gritting her teeth in a mild level of anger, Anko turned to the 5 young women shaking in their boots and ordered them to go home and get prepared for their training. Seeing and smelling their fear, Anko felt her libido rise and wanted to rush home for some before-mission, quality time, with her husband. Just as she was about to jump out the window, Tsunade called Anko over to her desk. Checking around to make sure that the 5 doomed Kunoichi had truly left, the older woman asked the younger woman a question. Who were Hinata, Ino, and Sakura fighting over? I know they have their disagreements, but a full-on destructive fight that damaged several acres of your responsibility. What the hell, Anko? Queried Tsunade. Do you even have to ask, Tsunade? Those 3 were fighting over our beloved golden whirlwind, Naruto Uzumaki. From what I could gather, Hinata snuck into Naruto's apartment in a quest to seduce Naruto and finally lose her virginity. It seems that Ino and Sakura had the same idea, but Hinata beat them to it. So as expected, Sakura and Ino were pissed, Hinata was smug, while 1010 and Tamari wanted to watch, answered Anko. Tsunade just shook her head in astonishment. Her adopted brother was suddenly a popular figure among the women, both ninja and civilian of the village. When she had gotten into the office this morning, Tsunade had found several requests from several of Konoha's single women from allied villages to marry one Naruto Uzumaki. Being the protective older sister type, Tsunade had gleefully turned them down by enthusiastically stamping them with her favorite rubber stamp. A big stamp the size of a small book that had "denied" engraved in the rubber. Turning to the purple-haired woman standing by the window, Tsunade asked her how long it was going to take her to get her temporary team ready. Not long, Lady Hokage. Not long at all. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a really pressing matter to attend to at home, stated Anko lecherously. Somewhere on the other side of the village in his clan's reopened compound, Kakashi Hitaki, now wearing the snow-white face mask that signified his position as head of the Hitaki clan instead of his usual black mask, shuddered as he felt a familiar erotic intent floating across Konoha. Recognizing the intent, the copy nin tried to hurriedly find a babysitter for his 11-month-old twins, Sugumo and Rin Hitaki, so he could disappear from his home before his wife returned. If he was still there when Anko arrived, Kakashi knew that he wasn't going to get any training done for the rest of the day. Oh, okay Anko. Don't wear Kakashi out too much today. I'll still need him later to help Iruka with something, answered Tsunade. Hearing no reply, Tsunade looked up. All she saw was a purple blur jumping from rooftop to rooftop. Shrugging her shoulders, Tsunade returned to her paperwork. Not surprisingly, she was confronted by another request for a marriage to Naruto Uzumaki. Denying this request like she had all the others, Tsunade let her poor abused hand drift down to her hidden sake again, only to have Shizune again keep her from reaching for her stress relief potion. Shooting a glare at the younger woman that could freeze an experienced Jonin in their tracks at 5,000 paces, Tsunade started to curse until Shizune reminded her of her doctor's orders. Lady Tsunade, you know that the doctor told you that you could not drink any alcoholic beverages in your condition, chastised Shizune. Damn it, Shizune, dealing with those 5, especially Hinata, Sakura, and Ino and their unrelenting crush on that blonde moron stresses me out, snapped Tsunade as she leaned back in her chair. Shizune nodded while checking her watch. It was time for Tsunade's doctor-mandated 2-hour break. Reaching down and pulling Tsunade's chair out, Shizune checked the stacks of paperwork on the massive desk of the Hokage. Seeing that before the interruption, Tsunade had gotten a good bit of work done, Shizune helped her friend to her feet. Once the 50-plus-year-old woman with the body of a 20-year-old was standing, Shizune glanced at Tsunade's rounded belly and wondered how much longer Tsunade had until the blessed day she gave birth to her first child. Shizune returned her attention to her boss when the older woman whined that her back was hurting and her S felt larger than usual. Lady Tsunade, you know that your S are heavy with milk and that's why they feel larger. They are larger in fact. When I purchase your bras for you I've had to start buying the next bigger size. Do you want me to send for your husband, Tsunade? You always feel less cranky when he gives you your daily massage, stated Shizune as she helped her very pregnant boss to the private resting quarters attached to the Hokage's office. Shizune, one of Jiraiya's massages is what got me into this predicament in the first place, damn it. If he hadn't been in there and adamant about getting some rest during the day, I wouldn't be pregnant in the first place, exclaimed Tsunade in a huff as she sat down on the very soft mattress and crossed her arms over her ample bosom, or tried to. Shizune heard the excitement in Tsunade's voice that she so desperately tried to hide and knew that more than anyone, Tsunade was ecstatic about her first pregnancy. Before she could comment, there was a subtle gust of wind and a familiar mint smell as the Hokage's husband shunshined in with the bag full of massage lotions draped over his shoulder. Shizune tried to ignore the stump of what remained of Jiraiya's left arm when he fought his battle against the head of the Akatsuki organization a few years back. Hey ladies, it looks like I'm right on time, chuckled Jiraiya in his familiar teasing baritone as he set down the massage implements and gave his wife the crooked grin she so loved. Shizune sighed in resignation as her boss reverted into a giggling schoolgirl whenever Master Jiraiya was around and quietly left the Sannin couple to the love she saw between them. Preparing to close the door, Shizune wondered when her crush would realize that she loved him as much as Tsunade loved Jiraiya and then some. Again checking her watch, Shizune smiled at the time she saw there. If she was quick, she could go to the cafeteria and watch as her crush ate his meal. Before she could exit the room, Tsunade asked her a question. Shizune, where is Naruto anyway? I haven't heard a thing from him since he said that his time as one of the new 12 ninja guards of the Fire Daimyo and his exchange duty with the 12 Arctic Foxes protecting Lady Koyuki and the 12 Desert Tigers protecting the Daimyo of the Land of Wind was complete? Asked Tsunade. I don't know my lady, but I did send Shikamaru Nara and Kiba Inuzuka to meet up with him and the fire monk Sora several days ago, answered Shizune as she edged towards the door. Tsunade let loose an expressive groan that metamorphosed into a high-pitched girlish squeal of delight as the strong hand of her husband deftly slipped under her jacket and undid her bra before returning to the table to retrieve a large towel he stretched out over Tsunade's back as she slipped her arms out of her jacket and brassiere. Oh great, the party boy posse. I wonder how much trouble they're gonna get into this time. Jiraiya, do you how much I hate it that you taught that blonde baka how to be charming during your training trips? After every mission he undertakes, I get so much paperwork from different lands wanting to marry off their daughters and single women to him. Geez, it's annoying, ranted Tsunade before succumbing to the ministrations of her husband. Jiraiya looked at Shizune and winked before mouthing something that brightened her day. Get going. Your crush forgot his lunch today and I told him that I'd have somebody deliver one for him. He should be in the cafeteria in 5 minutes. When you leave, check the top of your desk and take what you see with you. Now go, I'll take care of Tsunade and keep her busy for the next 3 hours. My dear wife is gonna get some sleep today even if I have to use a sleep jutsu on her. See you later Shizune, mouthed the toad Sannin as he bent to his task. Shizune gave the older, but still roguishly handsome man a peck on the cheek before shining away with a puff of lavender-scented smoke. The last thing she saw before she disappeared was Jiraiya leaning down and pressing a gentle kiss to the side of Tsunade's swollen belly. 75 miles away, the one shinobi Lady Tsunade was worried about was just disembarking from a train with his fellow member of the 12 Embers, Sora, a monk from a nearby fire country temple who had been exposed to some of the chakra of the nine-tailed demon sealed within his friend. The two looked around and spotted the group of Sora's fellow monks there to escort Sora back to the temple. Sora turned to his friend and raised the bandaged arm that hid his curse in farewell. Take care my friend, I look forward to our next meeting and rejoining our fellow guardsmen. We'll see who has improved the most in that time, stated the dark-haired man wearing the familiar white robes of his sect. He, just make sure you have some medic nins ready to take care of your wounds when we do, Sora my friend. I won't go easy on you, replied Konoha's golden whirlwind. We'll see Naruto, we'll see. Next time, let's restrict ourselves to 3 tails each. I believe it will take the daimyo and his carpenters and gardeners several months to repair the damage we caused while dealing with the attack by those unknown shinobi. I don't think they were ready for the appearance of one nine-tailed demon fox, much less his six-tailed demon fox backup. Sora chuckled as he started to head towards his welcoming party. Naruto Uzumaki, also known as Konoha's Golden Whirlwind and the most legendary hyperactive knuckle-headed ninja in the entire Land of Fire, nodded as he hitched his traveling bag further up on his shoulder, straightened his stance, and walked away from the train station towards the hotel district to find a room for the night. Oblivious to the looks from the bystanders, the 6'1", 200-pound Tokubetsu Jonin headed into the city after casting one more look at the disappearing form of his friend. On the other side of town, two ninja hurried towards the railroad station. Shikamaru Nara, the 20-year-old lazy genius Jonin of Konoha, glanced at the familiar form of the 19-year-old leather coat-wearing figure of his fellow member of Konoha's Rookie 9, Kiba Inuzuka. As he let his look flow over the rugged man, Shika couldn't miss the glint of platinum coming from the third finger on the left hand of the expert tracker Nin without thinking about the similar weight that would soon be gracing the same finger of his hand. Kiba Inuzuka had, wonder of wonders, been the first of the Konoha 12 to get married. On the occasion of the tracking expert's 17th birthday, the gates of the Inuzuka compound had been closed to everyone, including the Hokage, for the private ceremony occurring within. When it ended 36 hours later, Kiba and his new bride, a member of another family of ninja dog handlers who specialized in training their young shinobi and kunoichi in how to train and work with attack dogs, Aisha Kurimitsu, exited the compound in their marriage attire and went searching for their friends to inform them of the nuptials. Now standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and towering over the 5 foot 10 inch Shikamaru, Kiba strolled through the street with the devil-may-care reckless grin he was known for, though now it was a bit tempered by a bit of the maturity he was forced to quickly develop after his marriage. At the reception, Aisha had laid down the law of how she expected him to act when he was home. The 5'8", 135-pound kunoichi, with her wild reddish-brown hair styled just right, had backed up her threat of repercussions of his antics by giving Kiba a leather couch with his name on it as a wedding present, much to the delight of Kiba's sister Hana. The couch presently sat in the game room of the small house Kiba and Aisha shared on a piece of land connecting the Inuzuka compound with the Kurimitsu compound. Kiba always boasted that he had yet to spend the night on his couch to his friends, but he had spent a couple of nights in the doghouse Aisha had gotten him on their first anniversary. Shikamaru sighed. In 2 months, like it or not, he was marrying the Suna Wind Princess. Shika knew he loved Tamari and he knew that she loved him. Yet he was worried about how they were going to manage their marriage, being from two different hidden villages that up until 7 or 8 years previous had been mortal enemies. Shikamaru was also worried about how his future in-laws and the entire hidden sand village would accept the marriage. Well, he didn't have to worry about Gaara too much. The case cage was busy with being wrapped around his 12-month-old little girl, Chiyo's, little finger. Of course, Matsuri made sure that the case cage was humbled by having him take their daughter to work with him just about every day. Changing the dirty diaper of a giggling baby girl, who had impeccable aim, while members of his council laughed in the other room, humbled the mightiest of men, Gaara had taken to keeping several changes of clothes in his office each time he had to watch Chibi Chiyo. "Hey Kiba, can I ask you a question?" said Shikamaru as the pair turned up the street heading towards the train station. "Sure, Shika, go ahead," replied the dog trainer with a knowing look. Kiba had been expecting Shikamaru's question during their entire trip. "What is it like being married? I mean, with my impending nuptials and our abnormal lives, what does it take to make a marriage work?" "Getting cold feet, Shika? I don't think that Lord Case-Cage would be pleased if you backed out of the wedding. Not to mention what Tamari-chan would do to you." Shikamaru shuddered as he thought about that. It wasn't Gaara or Tamari he was worried about if he stood her up at the altar. The lazy genius was more worried about Kankuro's reaction to his backing out. The puppet-wielding Suna Jonin had already shown Shikamaru the specially designed puppet he'd built for Shikamaru if he dared to either back out of marrying Tamari or he dared to cheat on her after they were married. Needless to say, Shikamaru was suitably impressed and scared at the same time. "Not to mention what my parents would do if that happens. Mom has taken quite a shining to Tamari-chan and Dad is so whipped that he would do anything Mom said if I displeased her by doing something that troublesome," thought Shikamaru as he spotted a familiar tall blonde wearing a black sleeveless trenchcoat with a golden design around the edges that signified cyclones. Just as he was about to call his unpredictable friend, Kiba asked Shikamaru several questions that would disturb him for the rest of their retrieval mission. Shikamaru, do you love Tamari with all of your heart and soul? Would you die for her? Would you kill for her? Would you protect her with your life, even if it means giving up yours? Would you want to start a family with Tamari no matter what her family and village say? If you can answer any of those questions with a positive answer, then you shouldn't have to worry. If you can't, then all I can say is that you need to search your soul and find the answers that feel right before you sentence both you and Tamari to a hell neither of you deserve. Now let's go grab Naruto and make him take us out for drinks. You know he has a lot of extra disposable income to spend," commented Kiba before running up to the blonde man waiting for them ahead. Shikamaru thought about what Kiba had said but stopped when it became too troublesome. Reaching into the pocket of his Jonin vest for his pack of cigarettes and lighter, Shika remembered his sensei and wondered what Asuma would say in this situation. Shaking his head and extracting one of the menthol cigarettes from a small coastal village in the land of Wave, Shikamaru placed the filter between his lips and expertly flicked his lighter to torch the cigarette to life. Snapping his Zippo shut and replacing it in his pack in his pocket, Shikamaru took a deep drag and let the soothing smoke pour out of his nostrils as he looked up at the ever-present clouds in the darkening indigo sky. I'll think about all of that tomorrow. Right now it's time for 3 members of Konoha's party boy posse to chill out, relax, blow off some steam, and get blitzed. We deserve it. Shame Choji ain't with us tonight, then things could really get out of hand. Meh, we'll see him back in Konoha. Then we'll throw a proper party for the blonde miscreant. I better thank Master Jiraiya for that seal he gave me so that we can get both Naruto and his guest drunker than a ring-tailed polecat in a hurricane," muttered Shika with a smile on his face as he laced his hands behind his head and strolled over to where his partners in debauchery and crime were waiting with expectant smiles on their faces. Ah, life is good. Iruka Amino, Jonin Academy professor at the Konohagakure Academy for Shinobi and Kunoichi, lifted his head from the stack of exams on his desk and looked out the window of his office. The everyday happenings of Konoha soothed his mind and he smiled as those who had the will of fire, whether shinobi or civilian, went about their everyday lives. Gazing up at the mountain where the faces of the 5 fire shadows who had led and were now leading the village were carved, Iruka spotted a brilliant flash of golden light that surpassed the brightness of the sun and recognized it as coming from his one-time favorite student as he made his way to the place he went to think. Settling back in his seat, Iruka closed his eyes and let his senses fan out. Since it was nearing lunchtime, he could detect the chakra of his fellow shinobi as they gathered in the cafeteria. Putting names and faces to each disparate chakra flow, Iruka could, with a more than 90% success rate, figure out everyone who was in the cafeteria, approaching the cafeteria, or leaving the cafeteria. Iruka could even tell which of his fellow Jonin were in the special Anbu Black Ops. Annexed to the cafeteria, here were his fellow recently promoted Jonin Izumo and Katetsu shooting the shit at a table by the coffee and tea station. Their Ebisu, Jonin sensei for the Genin team of Konohamaru, Udon, and Moegi sat quietly reading the paper. Across from him were Kurenai Uehi, Yugao, and Hana Inazuka conversing over chocolate and nut brownies. In a seat next to the red-eyed Genjutsu mistress, Iruka could sense the developing chakra reserves of her 4-year-old son as he quietly listened to the conversation between his mother and her friends. Over near the sliding glass door leading to the balcony, Iruka could sense Maida Guy and his student Rock Lee as they lightly worked out after eating, all the while proclaiming about the spirit of youth. Opening his senses further, Iruka could sense the Hokage's assistant happily diddy-bopping and bouncing down the hallway towards the cafeteria. The academy instructor could almost sense the happiness oozing off the woman as she went about her business. There was even a subtle sense of sensuality mingling with her happiness along with something else. Wait a minute, I've felt that emotion coming from Shizune before. It's lust. Granted, last time I felt it, she was directing it my way. Kinda like Kurenai, Yugao, and Hana do now when they think I don't feel it. The Hokage's assistant is lusting after somebody in the cafeteria, but who is it? Wondered Iruka as he leaned forward in his chair and tried to focus his Kekai Genkai on the happy woman now entering the cafeteria. Once again thanking his family for his special ability, Iruka sighed and went back to looking out his office window. He pondered the trait that allowed members of the Amino family, not Amino clan, never Amino clan. There were too many family clans in the village hidden in the leaves already. Like one of his distant cousins who also taught at the academy, Iruka felt that Konoha had more than enough clans to need one more, to detect the chakra reserves of other shinobi at levels far surpassing what Jonin and even the Sannin could dream about. This trait helped him immensely when he was teaching mischievous academy students. It was a well-known fact that Iruka had never fallen victim to any of his students' pranks. Oftentimes, Iruka's students were awed when he would dodge whatever a student tossed at him with his back turned. Even though his parents had died in the Kyuubi attack 19 years ago, there were still a few Yumenos and their related families in Konoha. Though Iruka wasn't close to any of his cousins, aunts, uncles, and paternal and maternal grandparents, he still kept up appearances and showed up at family gatherings to represent his branch of the family. In fact, the last Amino family gathering had been 2 days ago and the elder family members had again expressed their displeasure at his continued bachelorhood. Although some of his female cousins had chuckled when it was revealed that he had recently been designated as one of Konoha's most eligible bachelors, over the age of 30, according to one of the civilian fashion magazines written and printed in Konoha, hell, he was in the top 5 of that list. Damn cousin Sayoko for absent-mindedly mentioning that Kurenai, Yugao, and Hana were chasing after me as a possible love match. And curse my grandparents for ordering me to look into such a match, growled Iruka as he thought about his cousin Amino Sayoko and her long, two-tone green-blue hair taunting him at the meal after the meeting. Iruka knew that if his 26-year-old cousin, a chunin and protege of Anko Hitaki, wasn't presently away from the village on a mission with her team, he would surely challenge her to a spar so he could force her to mind her own damn business when it came to the personal life of her 30-something-year-old Jonin cousin. Growling to himself again as he gazed at the stack of yet-to-be graded papers on his desk, Iruka Amino, Jonin Academy instructor and, according to Lady Tsunade, the shinobi on the longest-running and deadliest S-ranked mission in existence to teach the new academy students about shinobi life, threw himself back into the job he loved. Master Jiraiya glanced up from his position at his writing table to check on his sleeping wife. Tsunade was happily snoring away from her position in the bed where he'd lain her down after unceremoniously picking her up and whisking her away from a council meeting with their late sensei's teammates and taking her home before putting her to sleep with a powerful sleep jutsu, much to the annoyance of Homura sensei and Kaharu sensei. Jiraiya was going over some of the reports from his vast intelligence network about the goings-on of various persons of interest to Konoha and their allies while writing the introduction to his new Icha book. The one-armed toad sage was also writing in a couple of journal scrolls as he sat pondering new scenes. One scroll was filled with different jutsus and their uses. The other was a diary of some sort. Chuckling to himself, Jiraiya rolled the scroll of family jutsus up for later use when he would transcribe the different jutsus Tsunade used for the life or lives growing within his wife. Next he closed the scroll where his thoughts and dreams were and sealed it with an above-cage-ranked privacy seal so that his nosy wife wouldn't find out about his thoughts. Tsunade had done the same with her diary and Jiraiya had yet to find a way to get around her own seals. The accursed woman had used a seal the seal master side of him had recognized as being both a Tsunade original medical jutsu as well as a difficult, almost forbidden, variation of another high-level medical jutsu. Forming a familiar hand sign, Jiraiya summoned 2 of his clones to replace the scrolls where they belonged and leaned his head back against his remaining arm and watched his sleeping wife with a soft gaze. He was about to get up and join her in bed after yawning when one of his contracted toad summons appeared with another scroll tied to his back. Jiraiya's eyes narrowed as he recognized the scroll color as when he'd assigned to information about a certain foreign shinobi he and his student had met on their initial training trip many years ago. "Heiga Masakeichi, did your father send you?" asked the toad Sannin in a low voice as he leaned forward to retrieve the scroll. "Yes, Master Jiraiya. His most imperial cool dude toadness, Lord Gamabunta, sent you this scroll about the subject in question." Lord Gamabunta somehow got in touch with the heads of both the Demon Arctic Fox and Demon Desert Fox clans and requested this information. Both clans sent the information but with the stipulation that it not be revealed to the container of the head of the Demon Red Fox clan. There is still some hostility between the three clans that Lady Tsunade's head summons. Lady Katsu is mediating. Lord Gamabunta and his counterpart of the Snake Summon Branch clan are both worried as it seems the mediation is not going well, replied the tri-colored toad with a shake of his head. Jiraiya grunted and crossed his arm pensively over his chest after tossing the summons several pieces of butterscotch candy. The medium-sized toad croaked in happiness as he used his webbed feet to unwrap several pieces of the butterscotch goodness and insert them into his mouth. Unrolling the scroll and starting to read, Jiraiya thanked the toad and patted him on his head absently. Seeing that his master was occupied with his reading, Gamasakechi finished his treats and dispelled himself. He had to report back to his father, that most awesome toad dude Lord Gamabunta, the results of his errand. And he had to rub the fact that he got some candy into the faces of his brothers Gamakshi and Gamatatsu. Besides, there was a sporting event in the world of summons that pitted Lady Katsuyu's slugs against a clan of those damnable owl summons that promised to be interesting. Naruto Uzumaki sat in his usual spot on the head of the Yondaime Hokage and pondered what he should be doing. He couldn't go hang out with Shikamaru for a bit. Lady Yoshino had temporarily banned the other three members of Konoha's partyboy posse from the Nara compound after they had brought her son home from another bash thrown in honor of Naruto's return drunk. Shikamaru had fallen down in her nice clean living room and passed out next to his father, who'd just returned from a night out with his friends Shuza Akamichi and Inoichi Yamanaka that had ended up with them at their favorite watering hole. The Yamanaka clan head had regaled his two friends with stories of his dirty blonde-haired grandson, Inoiki Yamanaka. Ino had left her son in the caring hands of his grandparents while the newly demoted Degenin Kunoichi had left on her mission with Lady Hitaki. Lady Nara had chased the trio of her son's friends and fellow jonin out of her house with a flurry of senbon needles, shuriken, and kunai. Thus demonstrating once again that, even though she was on inactive duty, Yoshino Nara was still a kunoichi to be feared by everyone when she was pissed off. In fact, it was widely known around Konoha that the matriarch of the Nara clan was the only person to ever intimidate the original wild kunoichi Anko Mitarashi. Naruto laughed to himself as he remembered the small woman chasing both Kakashi and Jiraiya out of her well-cared-for house after the pair had brought Shikaku back from the pub where all of the male shinobi had celebrated Kakashi's bachelor party a bit too lively. Naruto had created a clone and had the clone henge into his Oiroke form of Naruko and drop in on Anko's bachelorette party where she found out that every so often Lady Yoshino liked to get as trashed as her husband when out with her friends. She was just better at recovering from a hangover than her husband. Naruto also found out that Lady Yoshino was a fellow jonin and extremely effective in discovering and dispelling a snooping and hanged cage bunchin at a kunoichi's only party before it got too wild and revealing. Glancing down from his location, Naruto saw the village he hoped to lead one day as a Hokage like his father, Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage, before him. Naruto also saw that by his side and being his gentler yet fierce side, like his mother Uzumaki Kushina was for his father, a woman he loved and cared for. Sensing several sets of feminine footsteps and a few feminine chakra reserves, Naruto grumbled to himself and launched his seated form off the mountain as a gang of shinobi and civilian females tried to pounce on their prey and get him in a compromising position. Oh great, fangirls, now I know how both Neji and the bastard felt back in our academy days. Sheesh, will I ever escape them? It's like they think I don't know what they want. Mainly me, although a few of them want to have my children. I would bet that somewhere in Konoha there's a secret magazine circulating among the unmarried women of childbearing age that documents my every move. At least Tsunade Bachan and Shizune Nei-chan are the only ones allowed to perform my medical checkups and complete physicals. Especially after it was revealed that there was ring of nurses in the hospital running a secret sperm bank out of the hospital stocked with samples of my DNA. I'm glad that Bachan was able to recover every sample either stolen or sold from the operation as well as quietly request that the kunoichi that had herself artificially inseminated to allow Lady Hokage to end her pregnancy. Although I did have to promise to allow her to bear one of my children after I'm married and have an heir on the way. Damn it, I even had to allow her to adopt either the Namikaze or Uzumaki last names when I make the decision about which one I'm going to use when I'm Hokage. Muttered Naruto as he hurtled through the air towards the village he so loved. After free-falling several hundred feet, Naruto used his elemental affinity to slow his body down and allow him to rotate so that he touched the ground feet first. Taking a minute to get his bearings, Naruto turned in the direction of his favorite restaurant. 6 bowls of the delectable yumminess known as ramen would help him put things in perspective. He took several steps in the direction of Ichiraku Ramen when an unbelievable force collided with him and knocked him on his ass. OWWWW, damn it, shit. What the fuck? Exclaimed Naruto as he angrily looked over at who knocked him down. Seeing the trademark blue net hair that signified a woman of the Hyuga clan, Naruto sighed in resignation. He recognized the short hairstyle as that of one of his genin team. Naruto knew that Hinata, recently demoted, much to his surprise, was presently out of the village on a mission and that there were a few more of the distinctive Hyuga women now moving around the village reveling in the new freedom given them by the head of the clan. The Jonin also knew that of those women, both branch family and main family, there was only one who would be out running during lunch. Yes, Hanabi, what is it? Naruto-sensei? Oh god, I ran into you? I'm sorry sensei, I'm so sorry, stuttered the 14-year-old genin as she jumped to her feet. Naruto sighed to himself as he rose while listening to the second Hyuga heir as she babbled her apologies. Ever since a sparring match between the two sisters had turned into an all-out war, the previously quiet Hanabi had become extremely loquacious. Naruto knew that he'd better stop her before she rambled on and raised his left hand to halt her speech while holding his throbbing head with his right. At least Hanabi still spoke in the formal and semi-formal styles required by Hyuga main family members away from the expansive compound. Hyuga branch family members were allowed a bit more leeway in their speech. Some had even started speaking like their matriarch Ten Hyuga, asking his student to tell the story over a bowl of ramen. That for some odd reason Hanabi had fallen in love with. Naruto led the genin to Ichiraku's. When he arrived, he wasn't surprised to see the other 2 members of his genin team sitting at the counter waiting for him. Seeing the familiar eyes and hearing the familiar speech of one of Hanabi's cousins, Naruto sighed again. Every day he wondered how he, of all the Jonin senseis, had had the misfortune to have 2 members of the famed family, and another of those distinctive blue-net females, as his students. Glancing at the forehead of Chito's Hyuga, Naruto was relieved to see that the member of the Hyuga branch family didn't have the same seal as her clan head denoting her place in the branch family. Naruto remembered the uprising in the Hyuga clan when Lady Hinata had finally lost her temper with her father Hiyashi Hyuga and challenged him to a duel for leadership of the Hyuga. Hinata had won, much to the amazement of every member of the clan as well as the village in general except for Naruto and Neji, and had ascended to the position of Hyuga clan head in a ceremony in front of the entire village. After the ceremony that day, Hiyashi had taken Naruto aside while still recovering from the wounds inflicted by his eldest daughter. He'd ended up on Tsunade's shit list for leaving his hospital bed in order to preside over the ceremony and pass over the robes and scrolls signifying his former position over to the new head of the clan, and expressed his pride at Hinata's ascendance to the position she was born to. Of course, being the sly Hyuga that he was, Hiyashi had betrothed Hinata to Naruto as his last act as clan head. Naruto was surprised, Tsunade was miffed, Neji, the other bastard, had laughed, Hanabi, Sakura, and Ino had frowned at the action. A few members of the Hyuga clan council had smirked, others had growled their displeasure, and still others hadn't worried about it. For her part, the new clan head wasn't happy. In fact, Hinata was extremely livid and had quietly and gently requested the members of her council and her father to join her in the council room of the Hyuga clan and had ordered Neji and some of the branch family members to keep everyone else out. Ultimately, several members of the Hyuga clan council had ended up in the intensive care unit, often called the stupidity ward, of Konoha's general hospital with serious Jukin-caused damage to their chakra systems. Hiyashi ended up booking himself into the hospital for several more weeks to recover from the new damage he'd incurred. He didn't have to worry much though. During his extended stint under Shizun's care, a few more members of the Hyuga council joined him. Naruto ceased his reminiscing and brought his attention back to his team as Hanabi and Chitose started bickering over some little thing or another. The lone male of the team, Ikutani Junichi, observed his 2 female teammates with an undisguised glee as it became apparent that the escalating argument between them was gonna lead to a catfight. He couldn't wait for that to happen because he could write about it and send it in as an entry for a writing contest sponsored by Master Jiraiya's publisher. Junichi is a pervert in training. He's gonna learn the hard way that it doesn't pay to stick his nose into a girl's fight without reaping the consequences. Whoops, there he goes. As many times as I've told him not to antagonize his teammates, you would think he would have learned by now. I'm glad that I hadn't decided to teach them arrow sennin's, invisibility jutsu. I'd have every Hyuga female as well as the old hag after me. Mused Naruto as he watched the 14-year-old boy go flying out of the restaurant with the help of 2 Hyuga Kaidens. The 19-year-old blonde watched as his red-headed student collided painfully with a tree 80 yards up the road and crashed to the ground. Naruto winced in commiseration as Junichi's head lolled around. Turning to his 2 female students, Naruto frowned as he watched the 2 glare daggers at each other. Deciding to have them work off their adrenaline rush and train at the same time, Naruto cleared his throat and told the 2 Hyuga to retrieve their teammate, who was now attempting to groggily rise to his feet, and report to Training Ground 8. And no fighting between the 3 of you on the way there. You don't want me to do the same thing I did last time the 3 of you got to fighting? I know for a fact that both Guy-sensei and Lee-sensei would love to have you join them for early morning taijutsu training tomorrow. Stated Naruto off-handedly as he ignored the looks of fear on the faces of the 2 Hyuga women. Yes, Naruto-sensei, we understand. No more fighting among us. Chirruped Chitose and Hanabi with barely concealed fear in their voices as they remembered the last time Guy and Lee had torture trained them. Hearing the remorse and worry in their voices but feigning that he didn't, Naruto bit his thumb and calmly called out. Kachiyose no jutsu. A puff of smoke appeared and when it had dissipated, there sat an orange and blue toad. What you want, boss? Asked Gamakichi excitedly. Oi Kichi, my genin are fighting again. Think you can find Guy-sensei or Lee-sensei and inform them that it's possible that my team might be joining them for early morning, youthfulness, training tomorrow? Asked Naruto as he idly cleaned his fingernails with a handy kunai. Sure boss. Gimme some candy and I will. Naruto laughed at his toad friend as he heard the paired exclamations of the Hyuga Kunoichi as their imaginations filled them with images of the 2 beautiful green beasts of Konoha keeping up a numbing monologue about their youthful spirits as they did 500 laps around the village on their hands and having to deal with a bunch of their sensei's cage bunchins following them and shouting encouragement. Last time they'd angered Naruto-sensei to this point, he'd sent them for training with both Guy and Lee and had made them wear copies of those god-awful horrible green jumpsuits while doing so, much to their great embarrassment. It had taken them months, and a couple of beat-downs on their fellow genins. Konohamaru Sarutobi and his teammates still occasionally walked with a limp when they were tired, to live that mortifying moment of infamy down. Hey Naruto, I know that you are one of our favorite customers and you always bring us business, but why do you torment your students that way? Asked Ayame Ichiraku as she set another bowl of pork ramen in front of Naruto. Ayame ne-san, it's not torment if they learn how to get along as a team. Their final genin exam was a mess. They barely passed the bell test. Even when Team 7 underwent the same test back, we did slightly better than my Team 19. It doesn't help that Ikutani is discovering girls and has a crush on Chitose, while Chitose is trying to prove to Hanabi that even though she came late to training, she's every bit the developing Kunoichi as Hanabi is. Chitose also has a burgeoning crush on Junichi while Hanabi is learning to express emotions other than the famed Hyuga stoicism and indifference. I've used the invisibility jutsu arrow sennin taught me to observe them when they think I'm not around. So far the latent expert teamwork is there, underneath their present dodgy teamwork, but they haven't discovered it yet. It's frustrating to see them this way. Now I know how Kakashi felt each time Sakura, the Teme, and I got into it. By the time Sasuke left the village and turned traitor, the teamwork of Team 7 had improved to the point where when we were out on low sea level missions during that time, some enemy shinobi were afraid to face us because they couldn't predict how we would react. Answered Naruto as he finished his ramen and got up from his seat. Turning towards the curtain that marked the exit, Naruto paid for his meal and the meals of his team before waving goodbye to some of the first people who acknowledged him when he was younger and fed him when he had no money as a child, scorned and hated by the village, unable to feed himself. Naruto glanced back at Ayame and her father Tuchi, saw how old he was in the lines of his face and hoped that when he did marry and have children, He could introduce them to his adopted godfather and godsister and their wondrous world of ramen. Whistling a happy tune, Naruto ambled off in the direction of the disappearing dust cloud that signified his students and philosophized about what he was going to teach them today. Deciding to ask Kakashi to pass on a message to Anko when she returned, Naruto smiled at the bright blue sky and golden sun warming his skin before using a shunshin to arrive at that specified training ground to wait for his team to arrive. Temporary Genin Hinata Hyuga growled to herself as she tried to clean the last of the spilled blood from her latest assassination victim out of the white silk kimono that had given her the nickname, Konoha's Ivory Widowmaker. It had been a rough assignment for the 6 of them and it wasn't over yet. Team 6-6 had been assigned a mission involving a series of several assassinations of Chunin and Jonin level missing nins. Unfortunately, it seemed that there were several assassin teams from the different hidden villages also after the targets, and the disparate teams were bumbling and stumbling over each other and occasionally attacking longtime enemies and allies. Luckily, her present team leader had been in the area before and knew every little hole in the wall bar and unscrupulous club where the targets would congregate and bandy around lies about their prowess as they drank themselves into a stupor. Anko was well known in some of the establishments and entered them all the time. A few times the team had entered a bar and walked into a vicious barroom brawl. But all it took for the fighters to calm down and start spilling information on the designated targets was somebody noticing the arrival of Konoha's smiling mistress of death and her infamous grin. When that happened and Anko made her interests known, an extremely long line of willing informants appeared at their table within seconds of their sitting down. The only payment Anko promised the men and women was that she would allow them to live. Holding her kimono up to the light, Hinata sighed and figured that she'd done the best she could and washed the majority of blood out of the shining silk and walked across the room she was sharing with Ten, Sakura, and Ino to hang the garment up where it could dry. Glancing at the clock, while absent-mindedly noticing the interesting pattern of blood splotches on the silk, Hinata saw that dinner time was nearing and she had enough time to dash off a quick letter to her beloved Naruto-kun before meeting the others down in the hotel restaurant and lounge. I bet the blonde and pink-haired hussies are already down there getting their drink on while plotting to take my baby away from me. Those bitches, snarled Hinata as she snatched her writing utensils off of the nightstand next to the bed she was sharing with Ten and stormed over to the desk in the room. Hinata absolutely refused to share a bed with either Sakura or Ino. Her reasoning being that she might accidentally kill either of them in their sleep. The wenches in question had rolled their eyes in a "yeah right" movement while Anko had yelled at them to figure out the sleeping arrangements on their own. Dropping into the chair and placing her stationery on the table, Hinata propped her bare feet up on the little footstool and inspected the pink polish on her toenails critically before deciding to avail herself of a pedicure and a day of pampering in the hotel's resort day spa tomorrow while Ino and Sakura carried out their assignments and took out their designated targets. Maybe I'll ask cousin Ten to join me in the spa. It would be a good thing to just hang out with her tomorrow doing girly stuff and relaxing. I could also ask her about her and Neji's activities before we left to meet the others at the village gates. Those rope burns on her arms looked pretty bad. Come to think of it, Anko-sensei had similar marks on her arms and legs when she showed up. Well, I have to request that she and Neji keep their voices down when they're enjoying each other's company. Last time they went at it, I had the damn clan council representative banging on the door to my private rooms at 4 in the fucking morning asking me, nicely for once, to go quiet those two down. Ruined the dream I was having about my Naruto-kun for the rest of the night, damn it. I hope Hanabi and Chitose are taking care of the poor guy during his recovery. Mused Hinata as she placed the tip of her pen against the corner of her mouth and thought about what to write in her letter. Several minutes later, Ten Hyuga entered the room and spotted her cousin leaning back in her seat with a dreamy grin on her face and some blood dripping from her nostril. Ten shook her head in exasperation and went about divesting herself of her clothes so they could be washed. Slipping into a simple robe and retrieving her bathing supplies, a curious Ten looked over her cousin's shoulder and started reading what Hinata had written so far. It didn't take long for Ten's own nose to start bleeding from the extremely imaginative and descriptive actions Hinata was writing her beloved about. Whoa, damn, my virgin cousin Hinata has a really freaky perverted side when it comes to the blonde IDI. Holy shit, that's descriptive, shouted Ten as she backed away from her cousin the Eki. Taking a hold of Hinata's shoulder and giving it a shake, Ten made a decision to help her cousin get her beloved and get laid when they returned to Konoha. A dazed Hinata came out of her erotic stupor and Ten passed her a whole box of tissue paper. "Hanwha, oh Ten, I didn't know you'd returned to the room," slurred Hinata as she confusedly accepted the box. "Hinata, cold shower. Now," stated Ten in a staccato voice. Hinata looked up at her cousin and wondered why Ten had a piece of tissue rolled up and stuffed into each nostril. That was until she noticed the slow leak of crimson coming from Ten's nose. Realization hit and the Hyuga main family head gasped in shock and whipped her head around to the sheets of parchment on the desk. It only took one glance at her indelible words and Hinata knew that her cousin had read her supposedly private letter. Oddly, Hinata wasn't ashamed, embarrassed, or even angry. She knew that Ten wouldn't tell anyone of the fantasies Hinata only wrote down in letters to Naruto. Sighing to herself and asking her cousin if she would assist her in her private quest, Hinata was happy to see Ten's nod of approval and grinned at her new partner in crime to steal the heart of Konoha's golden whirlwind and get him into her boudoir where she could practice all of her fantasies with him. Even though Hinata had thrashed the clan council, and her father, after she'd found out about his last act as clan head, it was more out of embarrassment and proving to the old fogies that she could be as hard as a diamond-tipped kunai of titanium alloy when the situation warranted it. Hinata had been ecstatic on the inside and immediately started making mental plans for a wedding that Konoha wouldn't forget. Unfortunately, before her plans could go into effect, a new protest group sprung up out of nowhere and raised such a ruckus about the impending nuptials that Hinata had conversed with Lady Tsunade and a few others and had, for the sake of the village, reluctantly agreed to put those plans on the back burner for now. As Hinata thought back on that incident while retrieving her toiletries and heading off to join Ten in the bath, she realized that the twin harlots had to have been the ones behind the organization of the "Women Against Naruto Marrying Hinata" movement and wasn't surprised. It would have been par for the course for Ino and Sakura to block the wedding. Those two can do what they want. In the end, I'm the only one. Lady Tsunade slipped the key to Naruto's apartment with the map to get around all of the hidden traps he has laid in his place of residence. Now if only my little blonde-haired stud muffin had been home the other night. I wouldn't be in my present situation, and if things had gone my way, in 9 months there would have been a blonde addition to the Hyuga clan. Damn Ino. Damn Sakura. Grunted Hinata as she forcibly slammed the door to the hotel room shut and stalked out towards the open-air bathhouse. Downstairs in the restaurant and lounge, Sakura and Ino both sneezed as they ate dinner. Across from the two, Temari lifted her eyebrows in exclamation and sipped her drink calmly while their team captain slugged down another shot of a new alcoholic beverage she'd taken an instant liking to. The drink, called bourbon, was imported from lands far across the sea and seemed, to Anko at least, to go down real smooth. Temari had been convinced by Anko soon after they got into town to try some and had been intrigued by the smoky smooth taste until she staggered off to bed late that night and realized that this bourbon had a potent kick if one indulged in too much. The taste numbed one's senses enough to impair their judgment about how much one has actually drank and made them think that they hadn't had as much as they had actually had. Come morning, Temari's head had pounded like a kettle drum and she suffered a temporary bout of vertigo. The 21-year-old Suna Kunoichi had somehow made it to the bath that morning to recover from her intoxication and had reveled as the warm scented water had cleared her sinuses and cleaned the fogginess out of her mind. Of course it had been quite amusing when her 4 teammates had staggered in and joined her in the bath for the relief it promised. Everything had been fine until the silence of the bath had been disturbed by the arrival of a severely hungover Anko. Temari and her 4 teammates learned that a hungover Anko plus a warm bath equals a whole lot of naughty fun that left everyone breathless and completely relaxed. Bowing her head over her plate of food, Temari hid the blush that was threatening to break out over her face. However, Ino and Sakura spotted the developing flush. The fiancé of Shikamaru Nara knew that she was in for a merciless session of torture as the pair tried to dig out what was making Temari blush like so. Resigning herself to the inevitable, Temari waited for Ino to use her family jutsu to delve into her private thoughts. When nothing happened, Temari was curious. Her curiosity was assuaged when she heard the familiar voice of Ino and Sakura's eternal rival. Ino, I knew that you just couldn't control yourself and gave in to the urges to go traipsing through somebody's mind. Damn it, can't you keep your mind to yourself just once? Tamari heard Hinata growl as she approached their table with 1010. Oh, stifle it, little Miss Perfect Virgin. This doesn't concern you. I was just trying to find out why Tamari was blushing and tease her about it. What's it to you, slut? Screeched Ino as she glared at her number 2 rival for the love of one Naruto Uzumaki. Before Hinata could respond to that, 1010 cut into the conversation and idly informed Ino that she'd contradicted herself by referring to Hinata as virgin in one sentence and as a slut in another. Of course, 1010 being who she was couldn't resist a parting shot at Sakura and Ino as she flipped open her menu to order. No matter what either of you two mommies do, I bet Hinata will have Naruto-kun in her bed with a ring on his finger doing all sorts of erotic things by the time of her 20th birthday, chuckled 1010. Before either of them could comment on 1010's words, a familiar irate voice whip cracked over the table and cut through the tension rising from the 5 Kunoichi and everybody paled. Anko had arrived, and she was extremely pissed. Several miles away from where Anko Mitarashi was chastising her team, Yukie Fujikaze was about to have a nervous breakdown. The actress had just received 2 messages from the Land of Spring, and neither one of them boded well for her plans. It seems that her council wanted to be sure that their princess was truly returning to her homeland at the end of her 6-month tour of duty. In less than a month and a half, the council from the Land of Spring as well as her ladies-in-waiting were going to arrive in time to attend the wrap party for her latest movie. At the party upon the stroke of midnight, Yukie was ordered to revert to her birth name as Koyuki Kazuhana, Princess of the Land of Spring. Damn it, this, shouted Yukie as she walked through the streets of the city incognito. Nothing could be done to keep the council from arriving and screwing up her detailed plans to get away. Even her producer and her director couldn't keep the old decrepit men and women from showing up. Somehow they knew exactly when the party was going to take place and how long it was going to last. Yukie narrowed her eyes as she realized how not only the council knew but her ladies-in-waiting knew as well. And one of those ladies-in-waiting was presently traveling with the princess as her manager. Damn that woman. Damn Misato. She had to go and open her blasted mouth about the wrap party. Now instead of melting away into the crowd covered by director Makino's excuses for my leaving early, I gotta stick around and deal with the asinine assholes. Shit, 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 double damn fuck, shit. I'm caught between a rock and a hard place here. Raged the thoughts in Yukie's mind as she sat down at a ramen stall to rest her feet and get something to eat. An hour later, a full Yukie strolled back towards the hotel by way of a slowly meandering course. As she walked, the princess tried to figure out a way to ditch her council and court when they arrived for the cast party. Still not finding a way, Yukie took a seat on a bench next to a forested area on the outskirts of the town. Leaning back and tasking her mind to search for anything that could help her, Yukie was sidetracked by the sounds of combat coming from behind her. Reaching into the pocket of her trench coat, the actress grasped the kunai knife secreted there. Rising to her feet and letting some of her basic shinobi training come to the fore, Yukie stepped quietly into the forest. Following the sounds, she soon came upon an odd sight. A 14-year-old boy wearing a tiger-striped pattern of shinobi clothing was battling 2 humanoid figures. It wasn't until the boy landed a kick on the figure to his right that spun him broadside to the actress that Yukie saw exactly who or what the boy was fighting. Her knife dropped soundlessly to the ground as her eyes took in the sight of a 6-tailed Arctic fox. Yukie's gasp of surprise stopped the boy and his remaining opponent from continuing their fight, and they both turned to the source of the noise. As the child's other opponent became visible, Yukie's eyes grew even wider. Both of the boy's opponents were humanoid 6-tailed foxes, one with the snowy white and light gray coat of an Arctic fox while the other had the light brown and tan fur of a desert fox. Before anyone could say anything, Yukie Fujikaze passed out. Oh great, now look what we've done you two. I told you that this was not a good place for us to train. Crap, muttered the boy as he walked over to the prone woman and checked to see if she was alright. Seeing that the beautifully familiar lady was okay and had just suffered a sudden loss of consciousness, the boy sat on his haunches and waited for her to wake up. Sighing to himself in resignation, the 14-year-old reached into his back pocket and brought out a bag of jerky to snack on as he waited for the woman to arise. 10 minutes after her sudden voyage to dreamland, Yukie's eyes fluttered open and she groaned as a pain in her head made itself known. Trying to remember what happened, the actress lifted her torso off of the ground only to come face to face with a set of young inquisitive eyes giving her a concerned look. Clearing her throat, Yukie tried to speak only to cough as the dryness in her mouth became readily apparent. "Here you go lady, have some water. It'll help you recover quicker," came a young tenor. Nodding her thanks, Yukie accepted the canteen the boy held out to her and lifted it to her mouth to swallow a few drops so her throat would be properly lubricated. The cool clean trickle of life-giving fluid went a long way to clearing her head, so Yukie quietly put her thoughts together before speaking. Handing the canteen back to the child, actress watched as he recapped the canteen and replaced it in the canvas pouch on his left hip. Taking a deep breath, Yukie started to talk. "You're a shinobi from one of the hidden villages, aren't you?" asked the actress. "Yes ma'am, I'm from one of the hidden villages. I can't tell you which one because revealing that would be the cause of my execution when my fellow shinobi found out. What I can tell you other than my name, is that I'm 14 years old and hold the rank of Jonin in my village. Unfortunately, in a few months I have to be in Konoha to take part in that damned Chunin exam to prove to the shinobi of Konoha and the other hidden villages that the shinobi of my village are not to be underestimated if they ever come against us in battle. I'm also going as a representative of the leader of my village as well as try and find one of our special ops Kunoichi who we've lost contact with," commented the boy as he stood up. "Don't forget the other reason your sister sent you out on this quest," chimed in one of the two-legged foxes holding up a tree nearby. "Shut it furball, why don't you and your cousin return to where I called you from and leave me alone?" yelled the boy as he made a series of rapid hand signs that caused the two foxes to disappear. Yukie lifted an eyebrow as she saw a pair of brief flashes glow through his shirt and figured that he must have some sort of seal or seals on his body. The young boy caught the movement and sighed. Whenever he met a new person it always came down to this. "Before you say anything, I'll explain. Do you know what a jinchuriki is?" Yukie rolled the term around in her mind. She half remembered it from somewhere but couldn't place where. Deciding to allow the boy to explain so she could gain his trust, Yukie signaled that she had a passing knowledge of the term with a nod. Seeing her nod, Yukie observed as the boy continued his story. "Well, to make a long story short, a jinchuriki is a human being that has sealed within him or her one of the 9 great-tailed demon beasts or one of their lesser-tailed cousins. Sealed within me are 2 Rokubi no Kitsune demons, lesser cousins to the strongest of all the Biju, the Kyubi no Kitsune. Also known as the 9-tailed demon fox. Legend has it that almost 20 years ago, Kyubi attacked Konoha only to be weakened enough by the Yondaime Hokage so he could seal him away within a newborn infant. However, unlike Konohagakure no Sato, in my village the 2 demon foxes sealed within me when I was a baby voluntarily chose me to be their container. Through the years, I've learned how to manifest them in this world to help me fight battles or to train and make me stronger," stated the child with his head bent low. Yukie could hear the hurt in the young shinobi's voice and it tugged at her heartstrings. Here she was bitching because her plans for a successful escape were on the verge of being ruined, and this young boy. No young man traveling around the 5 great nations by himself, going from town to town, village to village, making a few friends but having to hide his curse, or blessing, however you want to look at it, from those he makes friends with. Suddenly an idea popped in Yukie's head and she asked how well his control over his 2 guests was. "Oh, it's pretty good. Once I manifest them, I rarely ever have to worry about them causing problems. The desert fox is usually the troublemaker, but his impulsiveness is countered by the patience of the Arctic fox," replied the child with a hopeful glint in his light hazel eyes. Yukie laughed at the eagerness of the young shinobi and asked him if he could help her out of her present predicament. She offered to pay him a suitable amount of money and pass on to him any information regarding the Kunoichi he was searching for. All he had to do was be at her hotel and she would get him into the party. "There's one last thing I want you to do. However, it's for when you get to Konoha," asked Yukie as she leaned forward. "Sure, what is it?" "I need you to deliver a scroll to a shinobi of Konoha named Naruto Uzumaki. At the Chunin exam, he'll either be one of the test proctors or his team of genin will be entered in the exam. Look for a jonin with blonde hair, blue eyes, and 6 whiskers like birthmarks on his face, 3 on each cheek. If you can't find him, just ask around. Somebody will either point him out to you or they'll tell him that you're looking for him and he'll find you." The boy cocked his head and gave her a questioning look. He was kind of curious at why this nice lady wanted him to deliver a message scrolled to this Uzumaki. What was he to her? Yukie saw the look and blushed before mumbling out an answer. When he asked for her to repeat it, she just told him that he'd understand when he got older. The boy sighed and allowed the topic of the non-verbal discussion to drop, much to Yukie's relief. Hearing the growl of the boy's stomach that indicated it was displeased at being empty, Yukie told the young shinobi that she'd take him to get something to eat. While he was eating, Yukie would write the message she wanted delivered and got the boy to promise that he wouldn't hand it over to anybody but the person in question. He agreed as he ate at a rapid pace. Yukie smiled as she watched the youngster before turning her attention to the blank scroll resting on the table in front of her. Pursing her lips for a minute, Yukie thought about what she was going to write. When the words came, the actress uncapped her autograph pen and started writing. In the sunlit cavern of snow and ice, the snowshoe hare awaits her beloved. With his crimson gold fur ablaze in the sensuous moonlight, the hare dreams of the time when two will become one. Finishing her short little missive, Yukie wonders if Naruto will understand the message. She hoped in her heart of hearts that he will. Signing the message with a flourish and, as an added incentive, Yukie kissed the sheet of parchment reverently and rolled it up as tight as it would go. Reaching into the inner pocket of her trench coat, Yukie pulled out a signet ring engraved with the custom design she'd created just for sealing message scrolls written specifically for Naruto. The princess giggled in delight as she realized that this was the first time she was actually going to use the seal for its intended purpose. Requesting a small container of melted wax from the waitress, Yukie slipped the ring on her finger and dipped the engraving into the hot wax and waited a second for the concoction to adhere. Lifting the dripping ring out of the wax, Yukie applied it to the rolled-up scroll, thus sealing the private message within and keeping the scroll from unraveling from rough handling. Wishing she knew enough to create a sealing jutsu to further secure her message, Yukie handed the scroll over to the young boy with a deep breath. She hoped and prayed that her message would get to Konoha and the very special ninja that resided there. Lady Tsunade was not in a good mood. Standing at attention in front of her were the 4 members of Konoha's party boy posse. Sitting on her desk were 2 complaint reports that indicated that on 2 different occasions at least 3 members of the notorious group instigated activities detrimental to the health and safety of others. Reading between the lines, Tsunade knew that what the reports were saying is that one of the 4 Jonin in front of her had started a fight. "Alright you 4, start talking. Shikamaru, Kiba, and Naruto. First off, I want to know how a simple mission to retrieve Naruto from his train somehow ended up with the 3 of you practically destroying a neutral shinobi bar. Then I want to address this second report where the owner of a popular club here in the village had to call the Konoha police force to keep you from making a developing incident worse than it already was. To top it off, I have Lady Nara demanding that I drop-kick the lot of you into the stockade for a few weeks so that all of this youthfulness crap can be safely expended. Right now I am seriously tempted to follow her suggestion and just lock the 4 of you up. However, I'm going to punish the 4 of you in a different way. For the next 2 months half of all your pay will be donated to the cost of repairing both bars," growled the Hokage as she stared at her troublemaker quartet. There stood Naruto, his ever-present sheepish grin on his face while trying to look innocent. Next to him stood Choji Akamichi, one of her strongest shinobi and always eating from his bag of chips. On Naruto's other side stood Konoha's lazy genius Shikamaru Nara, the look on his face telling Tsunade that he was still feeling the effects of the party 2 days ago, and last but not least, the wildman of Konoha, Kiba Inuzuka, a smirk painting his features. It didn't take a brainiac to guess that Kiba was the instigator of the separate events. The Hokage continued her discourse on the punishments she was dishing out. "Furthermore, I'm also sentencing the 4 of you to other duties. First off, Shikamaru, it has come to my attention that Sanagakure no Sato has a vacancy in their strategy corps. You are to travel to Suna and fill that vacancy until Lord Casecage promotes somebody to that position. You leave tonight. Upon arrival in Suna, you'll report to Kankuro no Sabaku. He's waiting for you and I believe that the 2 of you will have a lot to talk about," Tsunade stated calmly while trying not to react to the dark look of terror that spread across Shikamaru's face. "I got him over a barrel and really shafted his plans for when Tamari returns from her punishment mission as a part of Anko's team." Shika, you're smart, but don't you think you should have waited to request that day and the next 3 days afterwards off? Alright, on to my next victim. Thought Tsunade as she watched her genius of strategy leave her office after she dismissed him and turned her attention to the remaining members of the Konoha's most notorious group of wandering Lotharios. Next up was Kiba, and Tsunade quickly sentenced him to 3 weeks on the wedding present from his wife and not complaining about it. Kiba had wanted to protest, loudly. But Shizune opened the office door and the irate voice of Kiba's wife Aisha ricocheted off the walls and into the unprepared eardrums of the 3 no-goodniks standing in front of Tsunade. The Hokage had to smother a grin when one of Aisha's attack dogs came bounding into the office and clamped his mouth on an intimate part of Kiba's anatomy and waited until his mistress stepped into the office, and with apologies to Tsunade, led her husband out of her office by his ear. Kiba tried to get Tsunade to go easy, but it wasn't possible to do much with his wife's hand on his leather jacket and one of their ninja attack dogs, loyal to Aisha only, trailing behind, nipping at Kiba's heels if he showed even the slightest sign of slowing down. Choji was tasked with joining a team of Enbu Black Ops on a month-long survival training mission in the Forest of Death with what he had on his person at that moment. Ironically, the training mission he'd just been assigned was the very one Anko had been tasked to oversee 3 days previous until she found her team of temporary genin desecrating her responsibility. Finally, Tsunade sat observing her possible successor as Konoha's next fire shadow, as he fidgeted uncomfortably in place while awaiting judgment. Tsunade knew that whatever she sentenced him to, Naruto would perform his punishment to the highest level. The hyperactive Jonin would bitch and moan, but he would do it as long as required of him. Offering up a wry smile, Tsunade knew her adopted brother would do anything to keep his dream alive and advance up the next rung of seniority till he ultimately sat in her spot as the 6th fire shadow of Konoha. Tsunade also knew that when she decided to finally step down and retire to raise her family, if the legacy of the 4th fire shadow was selected as her replacement, Naruto would lead Konoha and all of those who have the will of fire into a new golden age of peace. A peace that would last long after Naruto was gone. If he does become Hokage, I have a feeling that his tenure as Hokage will last far longer than the tenures of all those Hokages who came before him, even mine. Sarutobi-sensei, Jiraiya my beloved, Kakashi, the 3 of you were right in your own ways. Within Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki, the will of fire burns white hot. It burns so hot that it is an eternal flame that will never die. Nawaki, my brother, Dan my first love, here in front of me is the manifestation of your dreams. I know that as long as Naruto follows his nindo, the sacrifices the 2 of you made will not be in vain. Thought Tsunade as she reached for a tissue to dab at the wetness that was gathering the corners of her aging eyes. Eyes widening at a sudden revelation, Tsunade hurriedly jotted down a note and passed it to her assistant. Shizune glanced down at the note and did a double take. Lifting a questioning eyebrow at her mistress, the medical Kunoichi asked Tsunade for confirmation of the written request. Only if that comes to pass, Shizune, answered Tsunade out of the corner of her mouth. Yes, milady, I understand, Shizune replied noncommittally. Naruto wondered what had just transpired between his Tsunade-Basen and Shizune-Nisan. He brushed the thought away for now as he prepared for whatever the Hokage was going to set as his punishment for his actions. Naruto hoped that he wasn't going to be demoted like Hinata, Sakura, and Ino. He'd worked too damn hard to reach his present position, and he'd be damned if he was gonna be forced to give it up no matter how temporary it was. Naruto felt that he'd even go as far as to become a missing nin to keep his rank. Tsunade saw the fiery glint of determination in those bright blue eyes that every woman in Konoha wanted to fall into and sighed in resignation. She hadn't planned on demoting him for his minor transgressions, she knew the battle she'd have on her hands if she did. And with her pregnancy in its final month and a half, Tsunade knew that she wouldn't be able to beat him without dying herself and causing the life within her womb to cease as well. Naruto had truly become the most powerful shinobi in all of the 5 nations. In the numerous shinobi bingo books, the Golden Whirlwind surpassed his father the Yellow Flash in ranking. Naruto was the first and only shinobi in the world to have a rank that the bingo book authors could not categorize. The synopsis beside his entry in the bingo book had only one sentence: avoid at all costs. There was only one thing that kept Naruto from having an entire bingo book volume devoted to him and him alone. Those damned Uchihas. Seeing Naruto flinch at her show of the deadly killer intent that always managed to manifest itself whenever either of the infamous Uchiha brothers came up, and worrying about what her rage would do to her unborn child. Her baby kicked like a pissed-off mule on soldier pills whenever Tsunade got angry. Tsunade calmed down to a point where Jiraiya Jr. was happy and relaxed before facing Naruto. Taking a deep breath, Konoha's fifth fire shadow told the 19-year-old young man that she was sentencing him to teach at the academy alongside Iruka. Besides Naruto, you can use your Kage Bunshin and their henge ability to teach history lessons about each of the 4 previous Hokages. I'll even let you use some of the classified information in the Hokage library to help your lectures. I know you already have a few of his specially designed kunai and have learned or figured out the basic mechanics of his Hirishin, so you can demonstrate that jutsu to the students. You may have doubts about teaching, but all you have to do is be yourself. You're already the Academy's #1 success story. Each individual of the Genin 12, with some notable exceptions, are shinobi the newer generations can look up to. Naruto, you and your 11 friends are the living epitome of the will of fire that burns throughout our village and keeps it strong. Neji, Ten, Lee, Shikamaru, Ino, Choji, Kiba, Hinata, Shino, you, Sakura, and even Sasuke. The 12 of you are the eternal flames of Konoha. The present-day academy-age students need the benefit of your hope and inner fire. Out of the 12, only you, Sakura, and if he hadn't turned traitor Sasuke would have possibly been added to the list of possible future Hokages. Exclaimed Tsunade as she saw his eyebrows wrinkle up in preparation for his denouement of the assignment. Naruto halted his developing protest at Tsunade's decision when her words registered in his mind. Closing his eyes and crossing his arms across his broad chest as was his wont whenever he was thinking hard, Naruto weighed the pros and cons of the Hokage's punishment. Deciding that he could weather this little setback like he had weathered all of the others in his 19 formative years, Naruto nodded his acceptance of his new assignment and tried to mentally schedule his day so that he and his team could still do D-rank missions. Snapping his fingers in realization, the Anbu Black Op known as Coyote asked the boss if his team of genin could be his assistants during class. Tsunade agreed, but on the condition that Hanabi, Chitose, and Junichi not be allowed in her personal library since they were only genin and as such, had nowhere the clearance to read or research anything in Konoha's Hokage library. Usually Naruto didn't have the clearance either, but Tsunade could request that he be cleared to research anything in the library except for the items classified Hokage's eyes only. Hell, when Tsunade herself decided to do her own research on those items, the whole library was cleared and nobody was allowed in. Even Shizune, aide to Tsunade, wasn't allowed entry into the library when her Hokage wanted to read those highly classified materials, although somehow, Jiraiya managed to gain entry to the Hokage library one night while his wife was doing some classified research. Of course, Tsunade made him pay for his boldness after she returned home that night. Seeing the acceptance of his punishment in those clear blue eyes, Tsunade suggested that Naruto go home and relax. He had a busy day of teaching to prepare for tomorrow. Once the blonde had left, Tsunade sighed and leaned back in her chair and turned to a blank section of the wall. "Alright hun, drop the jutsu. I've known that you were here ever since those 4 troublemakers first arrived. Your invisibility jutsu is good, but you still have a little bit of work to do on it. You've been leaking minuscule amounts of chakra for quite a while. Now come here and take me home. Your child is giving my belly a workout," commented Tsunade. "Output and cup, I was hoping you wouldn't notice me. I just wanted to hear their excuses. You know me, if they were good, I was gonna put them in my next book. You ruined my fun," whined Jiraiya as he let his jutsu fade out. "Yeah, I do know you. That's why I ordered them to tell me the straight skinny and cut them off before they could even start making excuses." Although Shikamaru's saying that they were only helping a lady in distress, I didn't believe it for a second. First off, if she was just a lady, she wouldn't have found the place. That leads me to believe that the woman in question is a kunoichi of immense skill. And second, the description those 3 imbeciles gave me reminds me of someone I knew years ago. Long starlight hair curled up and draped over a shoulder, white mask with black stripes along one side of the front, scarred face, and cinnamon brown eyes, mused Tsunade as she tapped a pink painted fingernail along her chin. And don't forget the C-cup chest Kiba mentioned. I believe he said that the woman was almost as big in the chest as you and Shizune. Naruto mentioned something about stacked but I didn't catch it, joked Jiraiya as he gently settled his large hand on Tsunade's shoulders. Tsunade rolled her eyes at her husband's words. Of course he'd mentioned something like that. Granted, she was grateful that the dog handler had politely mentioned her sore assets in a politically correct, non-perverted way. Deciding to chastise her husband for his words and secretly hoping for another one his orgasmic massages, Tsunade turned around in Jiraiya's arms and faced him. Dear, I love you most wholeheartedly, but you are such a baka about the simplest things. With our child growing within me, I'm nearly an E-cup in the chest, or so says Shizune. Plus Shizune's tits are a small D-cup, not a large C-cup. Kiba must be blind or he's been comparing the S of other women to those of his wife. I just hope he's using his eyes only and not his hands. Aisha would castrate him if she discovered he was using his hands in non-shinobi ways. Either that or she would make him forget by giving him a long workout. I have a feeling that she's going to be requesting that her husband gets a few days off for recovery from wounds sustained in a full-contact sparring match. Don't you? Stated Jiraiya as he rested his chin on top of his wife's head. Tsunade heard the change in the timbre of his voice and knew he had something on his mind and was deciding on whether or not to tell her. Wanting her massage and wanting to know what was troubling him, Tsunade joked that she had already mentally granted Aisha Inuzuka's request. While Jiraiya and Tsunade were enjoying the blissful silence that came with being completely relaxed around each other, Naruto was entering his house. Slipping off his shinobi footwear, Naruto sighed and headed for the comfortable chair after closing the door. Stopping by a small memorial shrine with 7 black-framed pictures, Naruto knelt and began praying for his deceased Jinchuriki contemporaries. My 7 brothers and sisters, even though we never met during our combined time on this planet, I feel that we have been together in spirit. I feel your life's trials and tribulations as if they were my own. We are from separate villages, but we shared a bond closer than blood relatives. If those evil men and women from Akatsuki had not been around, I believe that we would have found each other and realized that the differences and hatred between our villages could have been resolved without war. I believe that if they had continued to treat us with wariness and hatred, the 9 of us would have more than likely started our own village where we would have helped each other deal with our curses and brought our plight to the attention of everyone in each of the 5 great nations and beyond. I would have fought to protect you and I know you would have returned the favor. We would have defended ourselves and those that followed to the last. Each and every day I am alive, I will fight with all my heart and soul to remember my family of fellow outcasts. My Jinchuriki brothers and sisters, may your souls rest in peace. I, Naruto Uzumaki, will fight to keep your memories alive so that when I rejoin you in the afterlife you will be proud of me and we can reunite and be the family we weren't allowed to be in the living world. Prayed Naruto as he lifted his head and opened his watering eyes and gazed fondly at the portraits of his brothers and sisters. If one had been there, one would have noticed that the blonde's eyes lingered for a second longer on the picture of a laughing blonde woman. If they had read the name carved into the frame underneath the photo, those bystanders would have gasped in shock as they made the connection. The laughing blonde Naruto gazed lovingly at was Yugito Ni, the container of the Nekomata, Nibi, the two-tailed cat. Finishing his moment of retrospection, Naruto rose to his feet and continued on into his spacious kitchen. He remembered the fight he'd had with Ero Sennin when he requested that the Toad Sannin acquire the pictures. Jiraiya had refused point blank. Naruto had erupted into a rage and cursed the famous author while chasing him all over Konoha. Finally, after Naruto had threatened Jiraiya with a public castration at the hands of the Konoha Kunoichi's club, the aging author had relented and sent word out to his spy network to gather, by hook or by crook, the requested photos. Of course Jiraiya, being himself, had changed his tune when he saw a picture of Yugito and recognized her naturally ethereal beauty. Passing through his living room, Naruto spared a glance at the full-size portrait hanging up above the fireplace. The portrait was of 2 Jonin-level shinobi dressed in exquisite formal wear. The blonde shinobi in the picture was recognizable to everyone in Konoha. Indeed, his visage solemnly gazed out over his responsibility from the mountain behind the tower that had been his office for a tragically short time. He was Konoha's 4th fire shadow, the Yondaime Hokage. His name, Minato Namikaze. Konoha's yellow flash ninja, and the father of the hyperactive knuckle-headed ninja known as Naruto Uzumaki. Sitting in the chair next to Minato was a beautiful redhead with an impish grin hidden within her genuine smile shining from the portrait. With her gloved hand resting possessively yet lovingly upon the hand gently grasping her shoulder and her ninja headband securely fastened above her forehead and proudly proclaiming her as heralding from the former hidden whirlpool village with its engraved symbol of a series of lines swirling away from their nexus. Kushina Uzumaki looked as if it was the happiest day of her life, not foreseeing the tragedy that would come to the newlywed couple a few years later. Entering the kitchen, Naruto paused for a moment as he looked around at how organized his mother had kept the kitchen. A place for everything and everything in its place. From the gleaming pans hanging over the kitchen's island counter, to the expensive silverware locked in their drawers, Naruto knew where everything was. Stepping over to the stainless steel sink, Naruto grimaced at the few dishes he'd left to be washed after cooking and eating breakfast that morning. To him, the dishes he'd left in the sink made Naruto feel as if he was dishonoring his mother by not promptly cleaning his dishes when he'd finished his morning meal. Gazing out the clear window over the sink at the small secluded forest, Naruto washed his dishes and put them away after they were dry. Going over to the modest refrigerator and opening it, Naruto retrieved a bottle of orange juice and headed for his favorite spot in the entire house. Leaving the kitchen after deciding to cook later, the teen headed for the atrium and settled into his favorite comfortable chair and turned to watch the sunset. Listening to the quiet and peaceful neighborhood sounds, the 19-year-old Jonin again marveled at how he had received the house he presently lived in. Upon becoming a Tokubetsu Jonin, Naruto had returned to his apartment only to step inside and realize that while he'd been out, his dwelling had changed. Somehow, the apartment seemed to recognize its residents' new rank and had revealed some of the secrets that had been hidden within. One of those secrets had been hidden behind Naruto's closet where a panel had noiselessly slid aside and revealed a unique kunai embedded in the wall. A curious Naruto had tried to pull the kunai out only to fail miserably. Irritated at his failure, Naruto had formed a Rasengan and altered it to where the fluctuating sphere of blue chakra had formed around his hand like Kakashi's Reikuri or the Tami's Chidori. With his hand so covered, Naruto had once again taken a hold of the kunai and pulled. This time the knife reacted and before he knew it, Naruto was engulfed in a bright flash and the familiar surroundings of his apartment disappeared only to be replaced by the unfamiliar sights of a beautiful garden in desperate need of care somewhere on the other side of the village. Shaken out of his amazement by the smell of the garden, Naruto had looked around. Stepping off the circular stone he'd reappeared on, Naruto stubbed his toe against what looked like a rusted kunai buried hilt up in the dirt. Confused, the 17-year-old had knelt down to study the hindrance only to come fully upright when he heard an unfamiliar pair of voices. "It took him long enough but I knew he would ultimately make it," came one voice. "It's about time too. Another few months and we would have been forced to kidnap him and bring him here before dispelling ourselves. That would not have been a good thing. There are still things he needs to learn about his inheritance," replied a distinctly female voice with a familiar tone to it. Naruto had whipped around and for the first time in his life saw his parents in person. As he learned a few minutes later, the two shinobi in front of him were not his parents but were a pair of cage buncheons created by his parents and tied to their house soon after Lady Kushina had become pregnant with him. At the time of the sealing, both Minato and Kushina had known that they wouldn't live to see their son grow up. They also knew that once both of them had passed into the afterlife, unscrupulous beings, most notably those damned Uchihas and that bastard Danzo from Root, would do anything and everything to get into their home and find all of the secrets the Namakazes were hiding. So to protect the family secrets after the death of their primaries, the clones were programmed with a memory block that could only be removed by one of Namakaze blood. Therefore, the secrets hidden within the house wouldn't be discovered. According to the clones, Naruto was supposed to have been given this house when he made Chunin. When he wasn't, the clones found themselves in a quandary. Their chakra levels had dropped to just above the level needed to keep themselves from dispelling and they hadn't been able to find a way to replenish themselves since Tsunade had started sealing up Naruto's DNA with a special jutsu they couldn't get around to protect Naruto's sacred bloodline. The two clones had discussed this problem in depth and were seconds away from enacting their plan when the child of their master and mistress found his way there on his own. Finishing his orange juice and rinsing his glass out, Naruto gazed out at his backyard and suppressed a sigh. Naruto knew that less than 1,000 feet away from him in a deep thicket was a place so sacred that an above-cage-level subtle genjutsu protected it. Village lore stated that after his battle with the rampaging Kyuubi, the body of the Yondaime was cremated and buried under a magnificent headstone in the shinobi cemetery. Only half of that legend is true. The cremated remains of the Yondaime Hokage, Konoha's Yellow Flash, and those of his wife Kushina, the Whirlpool Village's Crimson Cyclone, were buried at the request of their extremely classified wills, deep within the forest behind their modest two-story house. Since Master Jiraiya was the only person who knew exactly where Minato and Kushina wanted to be buried, they'd shown the area to him many times whenever the old pervert visited to check on how Kushina's pregnancy was moving along. Jiraiya and the Sandaime had come up with a plan to move the remains from where they were interred to the location designated by their wills. Knowing what the pervy sage had risked to abide by the last wishes of his student and also knowing what Jiraiya risked if it ever became public knowledge that he had removed the remains of the beloved fourth fire shadow and his wife from their eternal resting place, Naruto kept his mouth shut and allowed his respect and esteem for the toad sage grow. Deciding to go and visit the two modest headstones and spiritually converse with his progenitors, Naruto stepped out on his back porch and slipped his feet into a pair of moccasins and stepped out into the twilight. Strolling away from the house, the blonde came upon a well-worn natural cobblestone footpath. Following the path's meandering line for several yards, Naruto came to a well-hidden dirt path traveling further into the trees. 20 or so paces up the dirt path, Naruto came to a pair of hidden statues whose faces were worn away by their years of standing guard over this place. Stepping in between the statues, the 19-year-old Jonin put his hands together in a hand sign so ancient, no one presently alive in Konoha knew of it. Concentrating on what he had to do, Naruto whispered, "Kai," and the illusion cast over the area by the most powerful genjutsu mistress of the Yondaime's time wavered and allowed Naruto to step into the clearing, finally see with his own eyes the two headstones he'd visited many times since moving in. The granite markers standing before him had been secretly transported here by the same genjutsu user who had cast the illusion spell in the first place and had given the scroll to Jiraiya to pass on to Naruto when he came of age. Once that had been done, the Kunoichi had committed suicide to keep the secret she knew from being revealed. She was buried in the cemetery next to where the village thought their fourth Hokage and his wife were taking their eternal rest, and her name was on the memorial statue. Engraved in the headstones were the names of the shinobi entombed underneath them, the years they were born, and the year they died. Also engraved into the polished granite was their befitting epitaph. As usual, Naruto's laser blue eyes always alighted upon the other engravings within the stone. A nine-tailed fox surrounded by the personal crest of his parents, the combination of the insignias from their respective villages to form a more elaborate version of the Uzumaki swirl Naruto wore on his shinobi gear. Kneeling in the center of the stone circle in front of the headstone, Naruto closed his eyes and concentrated. Soon he could feel the mental link he had with the spirits of his parents tingling. A sure sign that the connection was being made. Soon, through his mind's eye, Naruto could see the spiritual figures he'd came converse with. With their battle coats flowing in some ethereally, I love that word, spiritual breeze, the two figures approached the image of their son. As usual, the specter of Lady Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze opened up the family conversation with a joke. Naruto didn't mind, he loved to hear her jokes. In a dark corner of Naruto's mind, a blazing pair of slitted ruby-red eyes observed the actions of the spiritually reunited family with a sense of loss. This time, the reunion was taking place as if it were a family dinner. Kyuubi wondered what could have his container so mentally disturbed that the moron would consult with his deceased parents instead of with him. The nine-tailed fox didn't harbor any malice towards the man who'd sealed him here. On the contrary, he respected him. He was protecting his precious people. If the situation were reversed, Kyuubi would have done the same thing. As he continued to watch the interplay between the two blondes and the redhead, Kyuubi sighed in resignation. He missed his family and wondered how his two fox cousins were doing. Occasionally, he was invited to participate in the discussions between his container and the spirits of his container's deceased parents, although he had to be loosely restrained from causing any mayhem. During the meetings he attended, Kyuubi and his sealer got along smashingly well, much to the surprise of Naruto and to the amusement of Lady Kushina. Kyuubi still remembered the last meeting he attended, and the spiritual hangover that had resulted from it. Deciding to leave the family alone for a bit, Kyuubi sighed and closed his eyes. He was tired and wanted to get some sleep. In Konoha, a month had passed and everything was almost back to normal. Anko and her temporary team had returned from their mission, 50 assassinations in 2 weeks. Anko was a very giggly Kunoichi on the way home. Shikamaru Nara had returned from an assignment to Suna that got quite physical. Tamari helped her fiancé recover from Kankuro's rough treatment. Lady Yoshino had banished her son and future daughter-in-law to a small 3-room house on the Nara clan lands because they got too loud and interrupted her sleep at night. Kiba was finally off the couch, but still very much in the doghouse. Over in the Hokage's building, the Hokage's staff was all taking bets on whether Tsunade would go into labor before, during, or after the Chunin exam. Since her mistress had decided to take the month off, Shizune was acting Hokage while Tsunade rested under Jiraiya's care. He refused to let anyone visit his wife during this time. Oftentimes, the toad Sanin was spotted as he ran errands. There was a bit of hostility between the Yamanaka, Haruno, and Hyuga clans that made council meetings a bit of a chore. Somehow, the inevitable had happened and the Hyuga clan head had beaten her 2 rivals into the bed of one Naruto Uzumaki and, according to a blushing Lady Hinata, he'd been most charming and had helped her get over her nervousness at her actions. What was being kept secret was the fact that Hinata had conspired with Shikamaru and Kiba and had managed to get the blonde Jonin extremely drunk and had cast a strong genjutsu over her prey. Sakura and Ino had been royally pissed. They'd seen everything Hinata had done from right on the balcony of Naruto's apartment where the 2 of them had landed in separate attempts to do what the formerly quiet brunette was presently doing. It turns out that Hinata was quite vocal when she's in the throes of passion. Outside the Hokage's tower, Sakura sighed in resignation as she remembered that night. She'd planned it so well, from purchasing the perfect lingerie, in shades of orange and black and quite sheer, from the specialty store, Kunoichi's Secrets, to getting her parents to babysit her dark pink-haired daughter Satsuki Haruno. Nothing could have stopped her from waking up in the warm embrace of her teammate. Unfortunately, Ino and Hinata had ruined her plans. Damn those 2. Damn them to hell and back. It was my night to be his, hissed Sakura as she pushed Satsuki in her stroller up to the bench she had chosen. Taking a seat on her bench, Sakura unbuckled her daughter and lifted her out of her stroller and into her lap before letting the large diaper bag she carried slide off of her arm to rest on the ground. The almost 2-year-old baby girl looked around with an interested twinkle in her sea-green eyes. Green eyes were a dominant trait among women of the Haruno clan. Sakura's eyes were a cool mint green in color while her mother's eyes were a pale emerald green. The 20-year-old mother sighed in a relaxed happiness. With her shisho out dealing with her own pregnancy, and being spoiled rotten by her husband, and Shizune running things, Sakura had been able to bring Satsuki to work with her today. Usually, while she was at work, Satsuki was either in the daycare center at the hospital where Sakura was one of the senior department heads or her precocious little girl was being spoiled rotten by her grandparents. Exhaling her exhaustion, Sakura leaned forward and attached a short length of material to the back of Satsuki's harness and placed her daughter on the well-manicured grass. Seeing the delight in those sea-green eyes, Sakura's heart skipped a beat and at that moment, Sakura knew what the most important thing in her life was. It wasn't being a Jonin-rank medical Kunoichi nor was it lusting after her teammate. No, the most important thing in Sakura's life now was the 18-month-old life now crawling around in the grass in front of her. In her little jumpsuit, Satsuki Haruno had become the most important thing in her mother's life. As she watched her child with a weepy smile on her face, Sakura heard familiar footsteps and looked up. Smothering her initial reaction to frown, Sakura gazed up at her blonde-haired best friend and her equally blonde son. Ino, Sakura, how are you and Inoiki doing? Fine, just came from the hospital where he had a checkup. Mind if I sit down? Asked Ino. Sakura looked up at the Yamanaka heiress and slid over to make room. As Ino lowered herself to the bench with a sigh, Sakura saw that the former fashion-loving Kunoichi had forsaken her old midriff-bearing tops and tight battle skirts for a comfortable calf-length purple sundress. The pinkette chuckled as she looked at her own attire. She'd gone from the knee-length battle dress she'd worn as a genin to short-sleeved or sleeveless short battle skirt, shorts to wearing something similar to what either Lady Tsunade wore or what Lady Shizune wore. Of course it was in her favorite color and shade of red, but still it was a big change for both of them. Ino heard her friend and narrowed her eyes as she placed her son on the ground next to Satsuki after attaching his own harness. "What's so funny, forehead?" snapped Ino, although the greeting lacked its usual insult and fire. Sakura waved a hand at what two of were wearing before replying. This is funny. Look at us, we used to be two of the best dressed and most fashion-forward Kunoichi in our age group. Now here we are, parents of our own children, by the same father mind you, wearing stuff that we vowed we'd never wear as we got older. You remember, we always said that when we became adults we'd dress like Anko or Kurenai, chuckled Sakura. Ino thought for a moment before letting a grin as big as a ray of sunlight spread all over her face. She remembered those times, remembered them well. Ino's grin broke out into a laugh. "Yeah, I remember. All the girls in our class except for Hinata vowed to wear as little as possible when we became Chunin and Jonin and were going on missions. Yet with all that we had to deal with, we could never manage it and our girlhood promise was forgotten. Although we did, unconsciously fulfill that promise when we were 15 and 16, replied Ino. Then it resurfaced again when Naruto became a Jonin when we were 17. Plus our infatuation with Sasuke shifted over to Naruto, returned Sakura. Ino chuckled a bit more as she watched as her son and Sakura's daughter played quietly together with their toys. Adjusting her sunglasses, the blonde interrogator asked her friend when she'd fallen in love with the orange-clad shinobi. I don't know, Ino. Probably around the same time as you did. During my pregnancy, the dear boy was always over at my parents' house checking on me, making sure I rested, making sure I ate. He even stopped by one cold morning just to carry me to an appointment I had with Tsunade midway through my pregnancy when I was really sick during my second trimester. It got to the point that I wanted him in that delivery room with me when Satsuki was born. Sighed Sakura as she brushed a strand of pink out of her eye. Yeah, I know what you mean. He was there for me as well. Naruto was more like an expectant father. Always walking with me to my appointments, checking up on me during the day when I was home. He told me once, and I believe that he did the same thing with you since we were pregnant at the same time, that if he had to leave on a mission during my pregnancy, whenever he returned he would come check on me before reporting to the Hokage and turning in his report, replied Ino. Sakura nodded as she remembered the kindness that Naruto shared with them equally. When she had her mood swings, Naruto was there to take any and all of her punches and kicks. Closing her eyes and smiling, Sakura thought about the time since Satsuki was born and he'd offered to take care of her whenever Sakura got busy. Sakura assumed that her teammate did the same for Ino and wondered what Naruto did to keep the attentions of both children since Satsuki always cried whenever her mother came to pick her up from her Uncle Naruto. Lost in thought, neither Sakura nor Ino reacted when a familiar long-haired Kunoichi timidly approached them. When the Kunoichi was less than 2 feet away, both the blonde and the pinkhead reacted and snatched weapons from their packs. It took a second for both women to recognize the addition to the group, and when they did, the pair wanted to groan. However, the look on the woman's face stilled their protests. Hinata, both Ino and Sakura stated. Ino, Sakura, nice to see you today, replied the Hyuga clan head. Feelings mutual, how are you today? Just left the hospital after taking a few tests and receiving my regular checkup. Other than that I'm fine. Ino and Sakura glanced at each other out of the corner of their eyes. Something wasn't adding up here. This Hinata reminded them of the timid girl they knew back in the academy. Not the confident woman recently promoted to Tokubetsu Jonin and head of her own clan. Before they could comment on it, the lavender-eyed girl broke down and started crying and beginning their forgiveness for her actions. Ino and Sakura looked at each other again with confused looks on their faces. What was Hinata apologizing for? Seeing that she was closer, Sakura gently patted Hinata's head and soothed her tears. Hearing the hiccuped reason why Hinata was apologizing, Sakura stilled for a moment. Just as she was about to comment, The medical Kunoichi saw her daughter crawl up in Hinata's lap and sit there with her thumb in her mouth while looking at her mother with those expressive sea-green eyes. Taking a deep breath, Sakura started to speak again. "Hinata, why should you be apologizing to us about what you did? You loved him before either of us did and you stuck by him even during the time he was absent from the village. While Ino and I were still lusting after the bastard, you never wavered in your love for Naruto. You saw who he was and how kind he could be before we even realized it. You deserved to have lost your virginity to him. He was the first and only man you ever loved. Ino and I, we were fools. But now we realize what is more important to us than loving Naruto. My daughter is more important to me now than some lust for Naruto. I'm sure Ino feels the same. Right now, I just want to go back to our friendship from those times." A teary-eyed Hinata looked up and saw the gleam of truth in Sakura's eyes and the same thing in Ino's eyes. Feeling a sense of sisterhood with the blonde and the pinkette, Hinata felt better and wasn't as worried about the news she just received from her doctor. Taking a deep breath, Hinata decided to tell her rivals, no her friends, the news. Grasping Ino's hand with her left hand and Sakura's hand with her right, Hinata told them the news. She was pregnant with Naruto's child. Behind the three women, Ten stood with Temari as both Kunoichi observed the reborn friendship between the classmates. Grinning to herself, Ten turned to her friend and exclaimed, "About damn time those three got their act together. It was beginning to wear on my nerves." Temari looked at Ten and chuckled. "Bullshit, Ten-chan. To you this was like one of those pervy daytime soap operas you love to watch. I'm not the only one, Mari-chan. Remember you stopped by my house frantic about missing even a little bit of Shinobi Hospital," laughed Ten as she turned her attention from where Hinata was playing with the newest additions to the Haruno and Yamanaka households.